Greetings fellow fans, you're tuned into Savage Harry presenting to you today What If Naruto Was Reborn in the Harry Potter world and fell for Fleur Delacour? Show some love by liking and subscribing, enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, the boy who remembered the first thing Naruto Uzumaki did when he was born into his new life was cry, not because he was frightened. Not because the cold air of the delivery room hit his lungs like a slap, or because the lights were too bright, or because being newborn was its own particular kind of indignity. He cried because he remembered. He remembered everything: Konoha's smell after rain, ramen steam curling in Ikaraku's lamplight, Kurama's enormous heartbeat like a second sun inside his chest, Hinata's hand in his, the faces of people he had buried. He cried because he was, in the span of one wet and screaming second, simultaneously an ancient man full of grief, and a brand new infant with absolutely no control over his own tear ducts. The Mediwitch who caught him declared he had exceptional lung capacity. His mother, Eleanor Ashford, née Pemberton, laughed through her own exhaustion and kissed his forehead and said he was perfect. His father, Caspian Ashford, standing in the corner with the stunned look of a man who had been told for months that this was happening but had still not truly believed it, crossed the room and put one finger against Naruto's tiny fist, and Naruto, despite everything, grabbed it. He decided in that moment that whatever this new life was, he was going to take it seriously. That took some doing in the early years. Being an infant was humbling in ways that surviving the Fourth Shinobi World War simply had not prepared him for. He had faced Kaguya Otsutsuki. He had split mountains. He had argued with a tailed beast the size of a small moon until they became something like brothers. None of that translated into being able to hold his own head up, and the gap between what his mind wanted and what his body could deliver was, for the first year and a half, genuinely maddening. He was patient about it, though. He had learned patience the hard way over a lifetime, and it stayed with him now like an old skill that doesn't rust. The Ashford estate sat in the rolling green nowhere of Wiltshire, walled by old stone and older magic, the kind of ambient enchantment that soaked into the mortar of English wizarding homes over generations. It wasn't grand, not in the Malfoy sense, not dripping with that particular brand of cold aristocratic performance, but it was solid and warm and full of books, which suited Naruto perfectly once he was old enough to reach the shelves. Caspian Ashford was a quiet, thoughtful man who worked in the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, and read history at the kitchen table with his reading glasses perpetually pushed up on his forehead. Eleanor had a small practice as a healer and an enormous laugh and made soup from scratch every Sunday and once hexed a garden gnome so enthusiastically it didn't come back for 3 years. Naruto loved them with a straightforwardness that sometimes caught them off guard. He hadn't had parents in his first life, not really, not present ones, and the warmth of this house hit him somewhere tender every single time. He was not going to waste it. By 4 he was reading independently. Not children's books, actual books lifted down from his father's study, carried with both arms to his bedroom floor. He read his father's volumes on magical history the way he'd once devoured scroll after scroll in Konoha's archives, hunting for anything that might explain this new world's rules. Magic, he understood quickly, was not chakra. It operated on different principles, pulled from a different source, expressed through different channels. A wand was not a kunai, a spell was not a jutsu. But the underlying logic, the idea that intention shapes energy, that focus determines outcome, that the practitioner's will is the final variable, that was familiar enough to work from. He started testing the edges of his chakra when he was 5. It was still there. He'd half wondered in his more uncertain moments whether a soul dragged from one world and dropped into another might lose the things that made it specific. But Kurama's chakra, even without Kurama himself, had left something behind. A residue. A warmth in the center of his chest that pulsed when he concentrated, that answered when he reached for it. Diminished, yes. The vast ocean of the Ninetales was gone, and what remained was more like a deep and steady river, still extraordinary by any normal standard, still enough to do things that had no business being done, but no longer the apocalyptic reserves of a Jinchuriki at full power. He was fine with that. He didn't need to split mountains anymore. He just needed to understand what he was working with. In the garden behind the Ashford house, on an overcast Tuesday afternoon while his mother was at work and his father was in his study, 5-year-old Naruto sat cross-legged on the grass and sent chakra into his fingertips and slowly, carefully walked himself up the garden wall. He stood at the top of it, all of 3 feet tall, his blonde hair whipping in the October wind, and looked out at the Wiltshire countryside with an expression of deep and private satisfaction. Then he climbed back down before his father could look out the window. There were things he chose not to explain yet. Not because he was hiding, he had never been particularly good at hiding anything, but because some conversations required a certain groundwork before they could land properly. I am the reincarnation of a ninja from another world, and I retain full memory of my previous life, including the ability to weaponize vital energy, was a sentence that needed context. He would get there. He was biding his time with the patience of someone who had once convinced a nine-tailed demon fox to be his friend, and that was saying something. His Hogwarts letter arrived on his 11th birthday, July 28th, delivered by a barn owl that seemed personally offended by the Ashford's lack of an owl perch. Naruto read it at the breakfast table, turned it over, tapped it against his chin once and said, "Yeah, all right," with the energy of someone confirming plans they'd already made. Eleanor cried a little. Caspian immediately started listing the required textbooks in order of what he remembered being most important. Naruto ate his eggs and let them have their moment. The train to Hogwarts left from platform 9 3/4 on the 1st of September, and Naruto found himself standing before a solid brick wall between platforms 9 and 10 at King's Cross Station with his trolley stacked neatly, watching other families in various states of tearful farewell and feeling the particular weightlessness of beginning something. He'd had beginnings before. His first day at the academy, the day he'd been assigned to Team 7, the morning he'd walked out of Konoha toward his first real mission. Beginnings had a texture he recognized, a looseness to the world, a sense that the story wasn't written yet. He pushed through the barrier at a steady walk, didn't flinch at the disorientation of the transition, and stepped out onto the platform. The Hogwarts Express was magnificent. Naruto took that in with genuine pleasure. The scarlet locomotive breathing steam into the September air, the platform crowded with noise and movement, owls in cages and cats in baskets, and the sharp smell of magic everywhere, latent in the stone, crackling off people's skin in the way that Chakra used to hum off a skilled shinobi. He stood there for a moment just taking it in, and then a first year with a pointed hat askew barreled into him, apologized breathlessly, and disappeared into the crowd. He found an empty compartment, stowed his trunk, and settled in. He'd brought books, not the required textbooks which he'd read twice already, but a collection of his father's volumes on magical theory, specifically the older ones, the ones that predated the current consensus, the ones that asked interesting questions about where magical energy actually came from and how intention interacted with it at the fundamental level. He was deep into a 1903 treatise by a Heliodora Fontenoy on the relationship between emotional state and spell magnitude when the compartment door slid open. "Is this compartment taken? Everywhere else is." The girl who'd opened the door stopped, taking in the scene. Naruto, the books, the 3 volumes set on magical resonance stacked beside him. "Oh, you're actually reading those?" "Was going to," Naruto said, looking up. "Seats free." She introduced herself as Hermione Granger in the manner of someone who had decided to be decisive about this social situation, and Naruto shook her hand and introduced himself as Naruto Ashford. He'd legally taken the family name. Though he kept his first name, there were things he wasn't willing to give up, and they looked at each other with the mutual recognition of people who don't quite fit the containers provided for them. "You've read Fontenoy?" she said, looking at the spine. "Working through it, the part about intent modifying energy output. He's not wrong, but he's asking the wrong question. He's asking what the modification does instead of asking why the modification works. The mechanism is different from the effect." Hermione sat down opposite him and the compartment door slid shut behind her, and that was that. They talked for an hour. Then a red-haired boy named Ron Weasley arrived looking for a place to sit. And then a round-faced boy named Neville stumbled in asking if anyone had seen a toad. And then a pale-haired boy appeared in the doorway and looked at all of them with that particular brand of casual contempt that Naruto had seen on the faces of 1,000 arrogant people across 2 lifetimes. And Naruto looked back at him with the flat, patient, completely unbothered expression of a man who had stared down actual gods and didn't find this particularly impressive. The pale-haired boy, Malfoy, as he introduced himself in the manner of someone expecting the name to do something, looked at Naruto for just a fraction of a second longer than the others. Something in Naruto's expression didn't respond the way Malfoy expected, and that pause was itself a kind of answer. "Ashford," Malfoy said, parsing the name. "Minor family." "Sure," Naruto said pleasantly. Malfoy left. Ron let out a breath. Hermione made a face. Naruto went back to his book. "You're not bothered by him," Ron said. "Should I be?" Ron thought about it. Most people are. Most people let other people decide how they're supposed to feel, Naruto said without looking up. I've never really been into that. The Hogwarts Express wound north through England as the sky went gray and then dark, and by the time it arrived at Hogsmeade Station and they climbed into the boats that carried the first years across the Black Lake toward the castle, Naruto was watching the towers of Hogwarts rise out of the mist with something that was genuinely close to awe. He had built a village from nothing. He had fought in its defense. He had known home as a thing worth dying for. This place was old in a way that villages weren't. Old the way mountains were old in accumulated time in layers of human meaning pressed into stone. He was going to like it here. The Great Hall swallowed them whole, 1,000 candles floating in the air above 4 long tables, the ceiling open to the sky or something that looked like it, enchanted to mirror the night above. Naruto looked up at it and thought of the Tree of Life, of Kaguya's dimensions, of the enormous strange places he'd stood in, and filed this one next to them. Different, beautiful. The Sorting Hat sat on its stool and began its song, which was more sophisticated than Naruto had expected, a whole narrative about the school's founding, the 4 houses, the qualities each valued. He listened with genuine interest. Bravery, loyalty, wisdom, ambition. Every school had its organizing principles. The academy had been less elegant about it, but the human instinct to categorize and sort was apparently universal. They sorted alphabetically. He was near the beginning, Ashford, and he sat before the crowd and let the hat drop over his eyes. Well, the hat said in the interior voice that felt like something pressed directly against his thoughts, "This is unusual." "I get that a lot," Naruto said, keeping it internal. "You carry more than one life in here." "I can feel it, 2 sets of memories, 2 complete histories layered over each other. I've not encountered this before, first time for everything." "You have the mind for Ravenclaw," the hat said. "The pattern recognition, the theoretical flexibility. And you have the loyalty for Hufflepuff. It runs very deep, that particular kind of faithfulness. I can feel where it's cost you." A pause, something that felt almost like sympathy pressed against his thoughts. "And there's ambition in you, significant ambition, a desire to be the greatest you felt that since you were small." "Yeah," Naruto agreed, "but I know what I did with it. I'm not interested in that kind of ambition anymore." "Then there's one more," the hat said. "Courage, not the absence of fear, fear, you've been afraid many times, but the willingness to walk toward things anyway. To stand in front of something terrible and say, 'Not on my watch.' That's Gryffindor's particular flavor, but you already know where you're going, don't you? I told you I get that a lot. You're rather infuriating, My friends used to say that." He paused. "I miss them." There was a moment of something soft in the hat's voice. "Gryffindor then, since you've decided." "Gryffindor," it bellowed out loud to the hall. The table roared. Naruto lifted the hat off his head, stood, handed it back to Professor McGonagall, who was looking at him with narrowed eyes that weren't hostile but were very sharply attentive, and crossed to the Gryffindor table, where a seat opened for him next to a red-haired boy he didn't know yet and across from a pair of identical twins who immediately grinned at him with the coordinated enthusiasm of people who sensed a kindred spirit. "Bold walk," one of them said. "Fred," the other said, extending a hand. "George," the first said, correcting the order. Naruto said, shaking both hands in turn. "That's a name," Fred observed. "It is. Japanese. Long story." They looked at each other with the wordless communication of twins and then looked back at him with expressions of pure delight. "We like long stories," they said, in the kind of accidental unison that happened when 2 people had thought the same thing at the same speed. Naruto grinned. For the first time since he'd woken up in this body, the grin felt completely natural, no performance in it, no nostalgia pulling at its edges, just the straightforward pleasure of meeting people who were going to be interesting. The feast materialized on the tables, and the great hall filled with noise, and Naruto ate with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had always taken food seriously and watched everything. He watched the teacher's table, Dumbledore at its center, a man whose magical signature was so dense and layered that Naruto, stretching his senses the way he used to stretch his sage awareness, could feel it from across the room like standing near a deep fire. Not threatening, just enormous. This was someone who had been doing significant things with magical energy for a very long time, and it had settled into him the way muscle memory settles, effortlessly present. He watched the other students. He watched the older years, the prefects, the Quidditch players whose robes had team patches, the pairs of students leaning together over whispered conversations. He built a map of the social structure with the automatic efficiency of someone who had spent years reading rooms for tactical information and now did it out of habit. He watched, and he filed it all away, and he felt, for the first time in this new life, genuinely, properly awake. The first weeks of classes sorted themselves out quickly. Charms was interesting. Not easy. Naruto had no particular innate talent for wand work in the way some students seem to know unconscious elegance. But when Professor Flitwick explained the mechanics of the Wingardium Leviosa charm, the underlying logic of sustained focal direction applied through a conduit, Naruto understood it immediately in terms of his own experience and produced a feather that rose smoothly to the ceiling on his second try. Not his first. He made himself miss on the first try. He wasn't being falsely modest. He just understood that being the person who did everything perfectly on the first attempt in every class was a particular kind of invitation for attention, and he preferred to choose when and where he drew attention rather than letting it accumulate passively. Transfiguration, Professor McGonagall. Naruto arrived at her class having read the first 4 textbook chapters, several supplementary volumes, and the primary philosophical text on material conversion magic, and sat in the front row. And when she performed her famous desk-to-pig demonstration and turned to the class, he met her eyes with an expression of engaged readiness that made her pause for just a fraction of a second. By the 3rd class, she had moved him to independent coursework. By the 5th, she was giving him texts from the 5th-year shelf. He accepted this without fanfare, thanked her quietly after class, and went to eat lunch. Defense against the dark arts was where things got complicated. The teacher that year, Quirrell, anxious and turban-wearing and strange in a way that made Naruto's old sensors twitch immediately, was technically teaching but badly, and there was something else in the room with him, something Naruto felt in the first 5 minutes as a pressure at the back of his awareness, like a malevolent resonance underneath the surface. He didn't say anything. He watched Quirrell carefully through every class, noted the specific quality of the wrongness. It wasn't just dark magic, it was a presence, a will layered into the man's life signs, and filed it under "this needs more information before I move." Herbology was Naruto's genuine surprise. He hadn't expected to enjoy it, but there was something about working with living things that settled him, and Professor Sprout ran her greenhouses with a warm practicality that reminded him of civilian Konoha, of the parts of his old life that weren't dramatic. He was good with his hands, always had been, and plants responded to careful attention in ways that were immediately legible. Potions was Snape. Snape was a problem of a different category. Not because he was frightening, Naruto had been frightened by things that could unmake reality, and this man, for all the cold precision of his contempt, was not that. But Snape moved through the dungeon classroom with the bearing of someone who had learned to weaponize other people's discomfort, who had refined cruelty into a pedagogical method, and Naruto found this specifically irritating. When Snape, on the first day, fixed his gaze on Harry Potter, who had arrived just ahead of Naruto on the Hogwarts Express, and who had been sorted into Gryffindor to thunderous applause from their table, and began asking rapid-fire questions with the obvious intent of humiliating a child, Naruto watched Harry's face cycle through confusion and embarrassment and something painful, and felt the old familiar heat of someone defending a person who can't defend themselves. He didn't intervene. Not yet. He was still calibrating this world's rules. But when Snape turned to the class after Harry's halting answers and made a cutting remark, Naruto raised his hand. Snape looked at him with the expression of someone who found the raised hand personally offensive. "Yes, Ashford. The question about the Bezoard and the stone," Harry said he didn't know, but the actual answer isn't in the first-year required texts. It's in a supplementary healer's reference that isn't on the syllabus. He said it with perfect calm and no accusation in his voice at all, purely informational. Just worth noting. The class was very quiet. Snape looked at him for a long moment with the specific stillness of someone deciding something. 5 points from Gryffindor, he said finally, for speaking out of turn. "Sure," Naruto said agreeably and put his hand down. After class, Harry caught up with him in the corridor. "You didn't have to do that," he said, and his voice had that particular quality of someone who was grateful but wasn't sure he'd earned it. "I know," Naruto said. "The answer was still right." Harry looked at him. He had green eyes that were startling up close, sharp and a little wary and very alive, and the lightning bolt scar that Naruto had read about in Caspian's wizarding history volumes. Naruto had thought before meeting him that Harry Potter would feel like a famous person, that there would be something self-conscious about him, the awareness of his own legend. But he just felt like a boy who was finding everything difficult and was being quiet about it. "I'm Harry," Harry said. "I know I'm Naruto." "I know," Harry hesitated. "Does Snape do that a lot, the targeting thing?" "Probably, it's a pattern." Naruto started walking and Harry fell into step beside him. "He's not actually interested in whether we learn potions, he's interested in something else." "What?" "Power over the room." It's not about you specifically, it's about demonstrating that he can make anyone feel small. People like that need an audience. Harry was quiet for a moment. That's a very calm way to talk about someone being horrible. I've met horrible, Naruto said simply. Snape's unhappy, those are different things. They walked to the Great Hall in a comfortable silence, and somewhere in the middle of it, without any formal announcement, they became friends. October arrived and brought with it cooler mornings, the particular smell of wood smoke and wet leaves, and the beginning of Quidditch season. Harry made the Gryffindor team as a first-year seeker on a Nimbus 2000, an event that sent the school into a brief period of chatter and debate. Naruto watched Harry's first practice from the ground with genuine interest, tracking the way Harry moved on the broom, the instinctive calculation of speed and angle. He had the reflexes of someone born to aerial work. Naruto himself had no interest in Quidditch as a player, not out of inability. He could have managed the broom just fine, but because a sport played in the open air on flying sticks while people shot balls at your head was not really more dangerous or interesting than things he'd already done at a fundamental level. But he sat in the stands for every match and watched with the engaged attention of someone studying tactics. And occasionally he'd make a quiet comment afterward to Harry about angles or positioning that made Harry squint thoughtfully and then try the thing at the next practice and find it worked. The first time Harry pulled off a diving recovery that Naruto had suggested, he looked over from the broom with an expression of pure delighted surprise, and Naruto just raised 2 thumbs from the ground and Harry laughed so hard he nearly fell off the Nimbus. November. The troll in the corridor on Halloween, which Naruto was honestly more prepared for than anyone needed to know. He'd felt the building's disturbance the moment the wards shifted. Hogwarts had deep, old protective magic layered into its foundations, and moving something large and wrong through it left a signature he could track with his eyes closed. He was already in the corridor near the girls' bathroom when Harry and Ron were sprinting toward it, which Hermione afterward found suspicious but which Naruto declined to explain. The troll was 12 feet of genuine danger, and he watched Harry and Ron handle it, badly then bravely, then with the improvised desperation of people who didn't have much else, and he intervened precisely once, when the troll's club was going to land on Ron before Ron had time to dodge. He moved with a speed he didn't particularly explain and put himself between Ron and the swing and took the glancing impact across his shoulder and then drove his elbow into the troll's knee joint with enough force to stagger it, which was exactly the opening Harry needed to hang onto its neck and end things. Afterward in the wreckage of the bathroom, Ron stared at him. "That was your shoulder," Ron said. "Yeah, the club hit your shoulder." "Yep, you're fine." Naruto rotated the shoulder in question with a slight wince that was genuine. It hurt but functional. "I've taken worse." "You're 11. I'm 11 now," Naruto said. Ron and Harry looked at each other with the particular expression of first years, who have just discovered that their new friend is operating on different terms than expected. And then Hermione, who had been pressed against the far wall throughout the entire exchange, walked up to Naruto and examined his shoulder with the focused attention of someone who was going to be a very competent healer or scientist or something that involved taking situations apart and understanding them. "Does it need treatment?" she asked. "Some Dittany if you've got it, otherwise it'll be fine by morning." "I have Dittany," Hermione said and went to get her bag because of course she did. That was the night they properly became a group. Not the 4 of them, Neville came in a bit later, nervous and apologetic and carrying Trevor the Toad, but the 3 of them and then Neville by extension, and Naruto found himself grateful again for this world's particular ability to generate people worth knowing. December came with snow and Quidditch cancelled for ice, and the strange tension around the 3rd-floor corridor that had been forbidden since the start of term. Naruto had already been to the 3rd floor. He'd stood in front of the locked door and listened to what was behind it, and identified the 3-headed dog's breathing patterns and the very large ancient magic under the floor that the dog was guarding, and he had walked back to the Gryffindor common room and sat with his back to the fire and thought, whatever is under that trapdoor, someone is trying to steal it. He knew it was Quirrell. Not completely, he had no proof yet, just the accumulation of sensory data from months of careful observation. The wrongness in Quirrell's presence had a direction to it, a leaning that pointed toward that corridor. He told Dumbledore, not in a dramatic way, he wrote a note. He delivered it through the school owl post addressed to the headmaster, and the note said simply, "I believe Professor Quirrell poses a security risk to whatever is being protected on the 3rd floor. I believe he is not acting alone. I am available to discuss this if useful. N. Ashford, first-year Gryffindor." The response came 2 days later in Dumbledore's handwriting, which was elegant and slightly purple in ink. "Dear Mr. Ashford, I would be delighted to discuss your observations. Tea on Thursday if that suits. Also, how did you know about the third floor? Naruto went to tea. Dumbledore's office was full of things, incredible, ancient things, instruments Naruto couldn't identify, portraits of previous headmasters who were either sleeping or watching with startling attentiveness, and the great bird fox on his perch, who looked at Naruto with one golden eye and then, to Dumbledore's visible surprise, fluttered his wings and leaned toward the boy. Dumbledore was watching Naruto with an attention that reminded him, uncomfortably, of people who had seen him do something they couldn't categorize, Juria's particular brand of fascinated wariness, Tsunade's sharp appraising look. He was smiling, but the smile was doing a lot of work, sitting in front of a mind that was running at full speed behind it. "You are," Dumbledore said, pouring tea, "a remarkable young man." "I've been told," Naruto said, "the third floor you sensed something through the wards." "The wards are impressive," Naruto acknowledged. "But I have my own kind of awareness. It's not magic exactly, it's something I was born with." This was the most Naruto had said to anyone in this world about what he actually was, and he said it with the same calm he'd brought to the Sorting Hat, matter of fact, neither showing off nor concealing. Dumbledore set down his cup with the deliberate care of a man organizing his thoughts. "Born with," he repeated. "Not learned, not developed through conventional study. Born with and then developed. There's a difference between potential and practice." "Yes," Dumbledore said, and the smile shifted into something more genuine. "There is." He looked at Fox, who was still watching Naruto. "I suspect, Mr. Ashford, that you and I will have many interesting conversations over the course of your time here." "I'm counting on it," Naruto said. As for Quirrell, Dumbledore's voice remained mild, but something in his eyes solidified. "Your concern is noted and shared. More precautions will be taken." "Good," Naruto picked up his teacup, "because whatever is down there someone wants it very badly, and whoever is wearing Quirrell's face as a second skin is willing to go through a first year to get it." Dumbledore was very still for a moment. "Wearing," he said carefully. "There's a second presence in him, you know it, I know you know it." Naruto kept his voice even, factual, not unkind. "I don't have enough information to tell you everything yet. But the wrongness in Quirrell isn't something he caught or something he's doing. It's something in him, something that thinks." The silence in the office was very full. "You are," Dumbledore said again, slowly, "a remarkable young man." "So you said." "I mean it with considerably more weight this time." Naruto finished his tea, and they talked for another hour about wards and perception and the nature of awareness, about what could and couldn't be sensed through stone and enchantment, about the long history of dark magic that Naruto had read in his father's histories and cross-referenced with what he'd personally felt in Quirrell's presence. And when he left, the sun was setting through Dumbledore's windows in long bars of amber. And Fox sang one phrase of something so clear and pure that Naruto paused in the doorway. He didn't look back. But he stood there for a second just listening. He'd never had a phoenix sing for him before. Winter break arrived. He went home to Wiltshire and his mother made soup and his father gave him a book he'd been searching for, an obscure text on the philosophical origins of magical law. And they sat around the fire in the evenings, and it was warm in the specific way that made him understand why he'd been reborn with a family, what this life was offering him that the last one hadn't always had. He did not think too hard about why he'd been reborn. He had spent most of his first months conscious in this body asking why, and he'd gradually stopped asking because there wasn't an answer coming. He was here, he had something to do, he was going to do it. He trained in the garden. Chakra control exercises, the tedious fundamental ones, building the precision back to the level it had been. It was easier in this smaller body in some ways because the scale was different, but the absolute proficiency required the same work it always had. He could walk on water in his father's decorative pond, which the fish objected to. He could stick to vertical surfaces without the seals he'd once learned, doing it on chakra density alone, which he found was actually more reliable. He couldn't produce anything near the volume of clones he'd once been able to sustain, but 3 shadow clones were enough for the training regimen he had in mind. 3 11-year-old Narutos ran drills in the Wiltshire garden in the snow, quietly, efficiently, and dispersed before a leaner got home. In January he went back to Hogwarts. The second half of the year passed with the quality of a story that's been set in motion. You can feel the momentum in it, the gathering of necessary things. The Mirror of Erised appeared and Harry became obsessed with it, and Naruto went to see it once, alone, late at night, and stood before it and looked at what it showed him. His old team. His old friends, Konoha whole and alive in the evening light. He stood there for a long time, then he stepped away. He didn't go back. He helped Harry understand the mirror without explaining what he'd seen in it himself, and the conversation was one of their best, sitting on the floor of the Gryffindor common room at midnight, keeping their voices low while Ron slept in his chair, talking about desire and what it meant to want something you couldn't have and what you did with that weight. The happiest people I've ever known, Naruto said, weren't people who had everything they wanted. They were people who were completely invested in what they had. Harry was quiet for a long moment. That sounds like something a very old person says. Maybe, Naruto said and didn't add anything. The year moved toward its end with gathering speed. The stone beneath the third floor remained its target. Quirrell's wrongness intensified through spring, the second presence leaning harder against whatever vessel it was using. Naruto stayed alert, stayed ready, ran his chakra sense through the castle's lower levels on a regular basis the way a security officer walks a perimeter. When it finally moved, when Harry, Ron, and Hermione went through the trapdoor, Naruto was not far behind. Not because he'd been following them. He'd felt the shift in the castle's deep wards the moment someone opened the trapdoor and he'd moved. He let them handle it. He stayed one room behind through most of it, watching, ready, letting them be the ones who figured it out, the dog, the devil's snare, the keys, the chess, the potions, logic, because these were their tests to pass and he understood the value of that, had always understood the value of letting people grow into what they needed to be. But when he reached the final chamber and felt the presence behind the mirror, not just Quirrell's wrongness now, but the full cold weight of something that had been very powerful once and was clawing its way back to that, he moved faster. The end of it was Harry's moment. It was supposed to be Harry's moment. Naruto stood in the doorway and watched Voldemort's shade shriek through the chamber and disperse, watched Harry crumple, and crossed the room in 3 steps and caught him before he hit the stone floor. "I've got you," Naruto said, and meant it the way he'd always meant it when he'd said it before in another life to people who had fallen in fights that mattered. Harry was unconscious. Naruto looked up at the mirror at the empty air where something hateful had been a moment before and felt not triumph exactly, something older than triumph, the particular quiet that follows a thing being resolved. He lifted Harry carefully and carried him out. McGonagall found them in the corridor, and then Dumbledore was there and the hospital wing, and Madame Pomfrey pressing everyone out except Naruto, who she tried to press out and who didn't move, standing at Harry's bedside with his arms crossed and his expression gentle but absolutely fixed, until Pomfrey looked at him and made a sound that was mostly exasperation and partly respect and turned away. He sat with Harry until Harry woke up. "You were there," Harry said through the disorientation of the hospital wing and whatever had happened to his hand. "Yeah, how much of it did you?" "Enough." Harry looked at him with those green eyes, raw and tired and honest. "It was Voldemort, he was in Quirrell." "I know, you knew before, I suspected." Harry processed this with the careful thinking of someone who was sorting through a lot of things at once. "You let me go anyway, down there." "It was yours to do," Naruto said it simply, no apology in it. Harry was quiet. Then, "Did you go to the mirror before all this? Did you see it? Once. What did it show you?" The hospital wing was very quiet around them. Naruto thought of Konoha in the evening light, of faces he would never see again, of a life that was over and a new one that was still being written. "Home," he said, "it showed me home." Harry didn't ask anything else. He seemed to understand in the way that people who have lost things understand each other without needing to explain the specific shape of the loss, that this was enough of an answer. The year ended. Exams happened. Naruto passed all of them comfortably and chose not to make a spectacle of his scores, though Hermione's expression when she saw his transfiguration mark was one of the funniest things he'd seen in either of his lives. They took the train back south through the brightening countryside, and the Weasley twins did something spectacular with a collection of fireworks on the Hogsmeade platform that sent sparks up into the early summer sky, and Naruto watched them go up and laughed with the full, uncomplicated pleasure of someone who is, against all reasonable odds, genuinely glad to be alive. He was 11 years old, he was ancient, he was brand new. He had 3 years before the Triwizard Tournament, 3 years before a silver-haired girl from Beauxbaton stepped off a carriage in the Hogwarts courtyard and looked at a world that hadn't figured out how to see her yet. He had 3 years to be ready, he was going to make them count. Chapter 2. The girl they all looked at wrong. 3 years moved the way years do when you're doing something with them quickly and full. Second year brought the Chamber of Secrets, a basilisk in the school's pipes, and a 12-year-old Naruto standing in the boys' bathroom staring at a sink that was also a secret entrance to a massive underground serpent den, thinking that this school had genuinely extraordinary infrastructure, and that whoever built it had very specific ideas about dramatic reveal. He'd felt the thing moving through the walls before anyone else had, the displacement of air, the weight in stone passages, the particular dead frequency of something that killed with its gaze. He'd told Harry quietly that if he ever heard the voice again he needed to tell him immediately, and he'd explained exactly why without being cryptic about it, which Harry appreciated. The year resolved itself without him having to kill the basilisk. Harry did that, which Naruto remained genuinely impressed by. 14-year-old soared through the roof of the mouth. That was commitment, though he had moved to intercept when the situation got critical enough that intervention seemed necessary, arriving in the chamber's upper passages just as Fawkes was carrying Harry and Ron and Ginny upward. He'd looked at the dead basilisk below and felt the same thing he always felt when he saw an enormous ancient creature destroyed by circumstance. Something that wasn't quite grief but was in the neighborhood of it. Third year brought Sirius Black and the Marauders map, and Professor Lupin, who was the best defense teacher Naruto had seen yet, someone who actually understood what defense meant and taught it like he respected the subject, and Dementors, which were the genuinely worst things he'd encountered in either of his lives because they worked on a level that Chakra defense couldn't easily address. He'd worked that out by the lake in October. A Dementor had come too close during a Quidditch match and Naruto had felt the edges of what it did, not the full despair. His mental architecture was too complex and too scarred for the thing to find easy purchase. But the shape of the attack, the mechanism. It fed on happiness by removing the ability to access it, creating a kind of psychic cold that cut off the upper registers of emotional experience and left only the raw residue of worst memories. He'd sat by the lake afterward, cross-legged in the grass, and thought about it with the careful analytical attention he brought to understanding any opponent's method. Then he'd worked out a modified version of Kurama's chakra that ran warm rather than combative, not attacking the Dementor, which was like trying to punch cold, but simply generating enough internal heat that the thing's approach couldn't find a foothold. He told Lupin about it during office hours, framing it as a theoretical question about the patronus and emotional temperature, and watched Lupin's expression shift through surprise and then intense interest. They had a conversation about it that ran 40 minutes over the allotted time, during which Naruto learned more about the nature of dark creatures from this one tired, careful werewolf than he'd found in any of the texts in the Hogwarts library. He produced his patronus the same day he learned the incantation. It was a fox, enormous, full-bodied 9 tails splayed out behind it in a fan of silver-white light. It stood in the empty classroom and Naruto looked at it and felt the ache in his chest that meant something about Kurama, about the partnership that had defined his first life, and he let himself feel it for exactly as long as it needed to be felt before moving on. Lupin stared at the patronus for a long time without speaking. Then he said very quietly, 9 tails. Yeah, Naruto said, what does that mean? It means something from a different life, Naruto said, which was the most honest answer he could give. Don't worry about it, it's friendly. Lupin looked at him with the expression he was getting used to from the adults who paid close attention, the one that meant I have more questions than I know how to ask. I find, Lupin said carefully, that you make a great many statements that are technically answers but are not quite explanations. I've been working on the explanations, Naruto said. They're long. I have time. I know. But some of it needs more trust built up first. Lupin accepted this with the grace of a man who understood that trust was a currency you couldn't rush. They continued their weekly conversations about theory, about the nature of magical creatures, about defense philosophy, and Naruto filed Lupin away as one of the people in this world he was glad existed, which was a category he was adding to carefully and with intention. Fourth year arrived in September with the particular energy of something important starting. He felt it even before the announcement, something in the air at the start of term feast, a heightened quality, the teachers holding information behind their faces, Dumbledore's eyes doing something specific when he stood to speak. Naruto had learned to read Dumbledore's eyes. It had taken 2 years of careful observation because the man was extraordinary at concealment, but there were tells, not in his expression which was always perfectly composed, but in the particular way his magical signature shifted when he was managing significant information. Like a fire burning more quietly than its fuel should allow. There will be no Quidditch Cup this year, Dumbledore said, and the reaction around Naruto was immediate and volcanic. He waded through the noise. This year Hogwarts will play host to a legendary event, the Triwizard Tournament. The reaction this time was different, louder, faster, the specific sharp pitch of genuine excitement. Naruto sat with his arms folded and listened and watched. The announcement continued: 3 schools, 3 champions, dangerous tasks, entry by the Goblet of Fire for students of age. He was 14. The age line would be set at 17, which meant he was, by all official parameters, not eligible. He had no intention of entering. This wasn't caution. It wasn't false modesty. It was a simpler calculation. Harry was going to end up in that tournament somehow, whether he wanted to or not, and the tournament was going to function as a mechanism for something much darker than a competition. He'd felt the shape of it in the way Dumbledore had spoken, not with celebration exactly, but with the gravity of someone who knows what he's walking toward and has chosen to anyway. The tournament was a trap with something behind it that Naruto couldn't fully map yet, but he could see the outline. He was going to watch. He was going to be ready. He did not need to put his name in a cup to be present when things went bad. What he was genuinely interested in were the other schools. The delegations were arriving in late October, and he'd read what he could find: Durmstrang, the northern school that leaned toward the darker traditions, and Beauxbatons, the French institution with a reputation for elegance and theoretical magical sophistication that Naruto respected. He'd found a Beauxbatons academic text in the Hogwarts library. Their approach to charm theory was different from the British model, more grounded in the caster's emotional state, more willing to treat magic as a relational phenomenon between practitioner and world rather than a technical operation performed on reality. He liked that. The day before the delegations arrived, it rained steadily all morning and cleared in the afternoon to leave the sky that specific clean blue that only happens after autumn rain. Naruto spent the morning in the library, alone, which was unusual but occasionally necessary, the mornings when he needed to think without the ambient warmth of other people's company, reading a French magical theory text, and making notes in the margins that would have made his first-year professors blink. He was working through a particularly interesting section on intent layering, the idea that a spell cast with complex overlapping intentions produced different effects than the same spell cast with a single clean one, which had significant implications for the way he understood Chakra's interaction with wand-channeled magic when something in the castle changed. Not dramatically, not a ward shift or a magical event. Just the quality of attention in the building, the way a large group of people all orient themselves in the same direction at the same moment, like a current switching. He looked up from his book. Through the library's high windows across the grounds, he could see movement at the edge of the lake. Something enormous was coming. He packed his notes, returned the books, and walked out to the grounds. By the time he got there, most of the school was already assembled, crowding the banks above the lake, and Durmstrang's ship was breaking the surface in a cascade of water, black-masted, vast, the residual magic on it old and serious. Naruto assessed it with professional interest. Whatever tradition Durmstrang operated in had roots in the same kind of combat-oriented magical theory he recognized from the darker sections of wizarding history. Powerful, somewhat blunt. Then from the forest on the other side of the grounds, the sound of hooves and wheels. The Beauxbatons carriage was powder blue and enormous and pulled by a team of Abraxan horses, winged palomino, each one the size of a draft horse and moving with the particular grace of things that could also be in the sky if they chose. They came through the trees with a sound like controlled thunder and pulled up before the steps of the castle, and the carriage door opened. Madame Maxime came first, and she was extraordinary, 8 feet of imposing presence wrapped in silk, carrying herself with the architectural confidence of a woman who had long ago decided that size was not a thing to manage around. Naruto respected that immediately. Then the students came down after her in their powder blue robes, a wave of them fanning out across the steps, and Naruto was watching the group as a whole, mapping faces and postures in his habitual way. When she walked past the carriage door and into the gray October light, he saw her the way he'd always seen things that were important, not all at once, but in a cascade of details that assembled themselves quickly into a complete picture. Tall. Silver blonde hair, the kind of shade that didn't seem quite natural, that caught light the way metal catches light. A face that was precise and beautiful in the way that certain things are beautiful, not soft, not the soft prettiness of a painting but sharp-featured and aware, with cheekbones that did something architectural. She moved with the ease of someone who had learned to be watched and was no longer surprised by it, but underneath that ease was something else, something that lived behind her eyes rather than in them, a wariness, a calculation, a private judgment that she offered to no one. The Vila heritage was immediately apparent to Naruto's senses. It didn't affect him. He'd spent 30 years in proximity to Kurama's chakra, which could destabilize reality itself, And whatever biological compulsion the Vila aura generated worked on entirely different principles than anything in his experience. But he could feel it as a field, a shimmer at the edge of perception, the magical equivalent of a sound at the upper register of hearing. He noted it the way you note weather: present, significant, not a problem. What he actually noticed was that the sharpness in her eyes did not soften once, through the entire walk down the castle steps and across the grounds, in response to all of the looking being done at her. Every student from Hogwarts who saw her immediately went slightly stupid about it, not just the boys, though them especially, and she moved through all of it with the practiced patience of someone who has long since understood that they are being seen as a thing rather than a person. The expression was something he recognized. Not from his previous life exactly, not from anyone specific, but from a category of experience. The face of someone who is the center of a room's attention and is completely alone in it. She didn't look at the crowd, she looked at the castle. And then, with the quality of the accidentally precise, the way a compass settles, her gaze moved across the assembled Hogwarts students and found Naruto. He met it straight. No particular expression, no reaction to the Vila shimmer, no performance of impressedness or defensiveness. Just the direct, attentive look of someone who was actually seeing her rather than the effect she produced. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to register that something was different about this particular pair of blue eyes looking back at her, and then looked away, back at the castle, with the absolute composure of someone who did not allow things to show. But in those 2 seconds, something had shifted slightly in the quality of her expression. Not a softening, something more interesting than that. A slight narrowing of the eyes that meant that was unexpected. Naruto went to dinner. The feast that night was the kind that Hogwarts did when it was trying to impress, tables groaning, enchanted to produce French cuisine alongside the British standards, which was a nice gesture that most of the students ignored in favor of the usual. Naruto ate steadily and observed the Beauxbatons table, where Madame Maxime sat with Dumbledore, and the students had been seated in a group that contained the particular social geometry of every school in the world. The popular center, the peripheral clusters, the person who sat slightly apart from all of it. Fleur Delacour, he found the name in his mental catalog where he'd filed it while reading through everything available on the tournament's likely participants, sat at the end of the Beauxbatons group with 2 other girls, and she was talking, but not in the way of someone who was deeply present in the conversation. She was performing conversation, and doing it beautifully, and all the while those sharp gray eyes were moving around the great hall with the systematic observation of someone doing reconnaissance. He watched her do it until her gaze tracked to him and found him watching, at which point he simply nodded once, the way you acknowledge someone you've registered, and turned back to his food. She was going to be interesting. The goblet of fire arrived the next day in the great hall, a wooden cup that burned with blue fire. Dumbledore's age line went down around it in a ring of shining powder that Naruto studied with professional interest. It was anchored to biological age markers in the caster's magical signature, a sophisticated piece of enchantment, genuinely difficult to fool. He watched Fred and George try to cross it with an aging potion that afternoon and land on their backs with identical long white beards that they took with better humor than expected, sitting up among everyone's laughter with expressions of wounded dignity that quickly became grins. He helped them to the hospital wing, one hand under each arm, listening to them argue about whose idea it had been, and he was still grinning when he came back. Fleur submitted her name the following morning. He was in the great hall for breakfast when she walked up to the goblet alone, no theater, no gathering of friends, just walking up with that precise direct stride and dropping her piece of parchment into the fire as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. She turned to walk back and her gaze crossed the hall and found his again, and this time she didn't look away immediately. He raised his cup of tea in a small salute. Her expression shifted by approximately nothing, but the corner of her mouth moved by a fraction of an inch in something that a generous observer might have called the ghost of acknowledgement. That was enough. He had to wait 3 days before circumstances provided a natural opening. He was patient. He used the time to finish his analysis of the tournament's tasks. There were historical records, incomplete but useful, and he reconstructed the probable format from them and from what he could infer about the location-specific wards around the Hogwarts grounds. One task would use the forest, one would use the lake. One, probably the final, would require something constructed or modified. He made notes, organized his thinking, and went about his ordinary academic life. The natural opening came in the library on a Wednesday evening. He was working on a transfiguration essay not because he needed to, he'd finished the conceptual material 2 weeks ago, but because the process of articulating theory and writing sharpened his thinking in ways that just knowing things didn't, and he heard, 2 rows away, the particular frustrated sound of someone encountering a research problem. Not dramatic. Just a low breath of air through the nose, the sound of a book being closed with more force than it deserved, then silence, then the sound of another book being opened. He finished his sentence, capped his ink, and walked around the shelf. She was at a table with 4 books open in front of her, her silver blonde hair loose around her shoulders, and she was reading with the focused intensity of someone who had already been through 2 of the other books and found them inadequate. Her notes were in French, precise and detailed, and the section she was hunting through was on water-based magical environments, specifically the deep-water section of a text on British wizarding geography. He pulled the chair across the table from her and sat down. She looked up immediately, not startled, too aware of her surroundings to be startled but quick, the look of someone who monitors the perimeter. Her eyes settled on him and the calculating intelligence in them ran a rapid assessment that he could practically watch happen. "You," she said. "Me," he agreed. Her English was accented not heavily but the precision of someone who speaks a language correctly rather than colloquially, each word placed with attention. "You are the one who has been watching me." "You've been watching everyone," Naruto said. "I'm just more obvious about it." Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth, it wasn't warm yet, but the particular adjustment of someone recalibrating their expectation. "What do you want?" "I'm not sure yet," he said honestly. "Right now I'm curious about what you're looking for because you've been through 3 sources on the lake and you look annoyed, which means none of them have what you need and I might know where what you need actually is." A silence. She looked at him steadily with those gray eyes that didn't give much away. "You can't enter the tournament," she said. "You are too young." "I know, I'm not interested in the tournament." "Then what do you want with?" "I'm interested in you," Naruto said. "Not like that," he added immediately, reading her expression's slight shift. "I mean I'm interested in you as a person because you've been in this school for 4 days and you're doing reconnaissance on all of it and nobody else seems to have noticed. And also your approach to that charm during the welcoming feast was different from what any of the British students were doing. The wand movement was identical but the intent structure was different. French methodology, which I've been reading about." "I have questions about that." The silence that followed this speech was a different kind of silence, not calculating now, something more like genuine surprise, carefully contained. "You noticed the charm," she said, "the intent layering, it read differently. You can sense intent layering. With some effort, your technique is cleaner than most of what I've seen here, more relational, less mechanical." She closed the book in front of her slowly and looked at him with the attention that she clearly didn't give to most situations. "What is your name?" "Naruto Ashford, 4th year. Fleur Delacour, a beat. You are reading about Bobaton's methodology, comparing it to the British approach. The differences are philosophically significant. It's not just style, it's a fundamentally different model of what magic is and where it comes from. Most British students," Fleur said with a precision that wasn't quite dismissive but was in the neighborhood of it, "do not think in those terms." "I'm not most British students." "No," she said and looked at him. "You are not." The library was quiet around them, the evening light going gold through the high windows, and Naruto pulled his chair closer to the table and said, "What are you looking for in the lake sources?" She looked at him for another moment, the final assessment, he could tell, the decision being made, and then she turned the book she'd been reading and pointed to a passage on the deep-water magical ecosystem of the Black Lake. They talked for an hour and 40 minutes. About the lake, about water-based magical resistance and how it interacted with standard charm frequency, about the specific challenges of maintaining concentration under environmental pressure, about the theoretical differences between French and British approaches to combat magic. She was extraordinarily sharp, her mind moved through problems with a lateral quality that he appreciated, jumping connections he had to work to follow, not because they were wrong but because they skipped steps that she'd already internalized. She'd been thinking about this kind of thing for years. She tested him throughout the conversation. Subtle things, a question phrased to invite a wrong assumption, a statement that contained a small error, a conceptual jump that could have been followed with a cliché. He caught each one not belligerently, just accurately, and she noted each catch with the particular attention of someone calibrating upward. When it was time to go, the library was closing. Madame Pince was making noises in the distance, She gathered her books with the efficient movements of someone who never makes unnecessary gestures and stood. "You didn't flinch," she said. He looked up from stacking his own books. "From what?" "When you first saw me." She said it without self-consciousness, just matter of fact, the way you state a thing that is true and has been true for long enough that you've stopped being surprised by it. "When most people first see me, they flinch or they stare, or they become—" She made a slight gesture with one hand that managed to contain the entire spectrum of stupid human behavior she'd witnessed. "Different. I noticed you," Naruto said. "I just didn't react the way you expected." "Why not?" He considered how to answer this honestly. "I've been around things that were a lot more destabilizing than Avila's aura," he said. "And I've learned that the most interesting thing about a person is never the first thing you notice." She looked at him with the gray eyes that didn't soften easily, and something in them, not softening but shifting, moved in a way he'd keep thinking about afterward. "Good night, Naruto Ashford," she said. "Good night, Fleur Delacour." The champions were selected on Halloween night, and the evening played out in the sequence he'd expected with the deviations he'd anticipated. Cedric Diggory for Hogwarts, Victor Crumb for Durmstrang, Fleur Delacour for Beauxbatons. The goblet went quiet, and then, after a pause that felt like a held breath, it fired a fourth piece of parchment. "Harry James Potter." The Great Hall erupted. Naruto watched Harry's face go through the stages of someone receiving news that cannot be correct and yet clearly is, and watched Dumbledore cross the floor with his expression doing the controlled burn thing, and watched the Slytherin table's reaction with the sour recognition that envy was humanity's most reliable constant, and then he watched Fleur. She was watching Harry too, but with something specific, not the contempt some of the others wore, and not the excitement of people who found the drama entertaining. She was watching with the focused attention of someone updating a threat assessment, her eyes moving between the boy and the headmasters and the goblet with the systematic speed of a real tactical thinker. She glanced at Naruto. He tilted his head slightly. "See it?" Her chin dropped a fraction. "Yes, 4 champions. One school got 2. Something had entered Harry's name with the specific intention of making him a champion, and that something had got past Dumbledore's age line, which was not trivial. Someone had planned this and planned it well. Naruto had already started narrowing the list. He didn't see much of Fleur in the 2 weeks between the selection and the first task. They were both busy, she with her own preparation, him with the work of tracking the information around Harry's situation. The new development with the moody replacement, the man's magical signature, was wrong in a way that reminded him unpleasantly of Quirrell's, layered with something else, though the masking was far more sophisticated this time. He caught her in the library twice and in the corridor outside the Great Hall once, and each time they exchanged exactly as much as was necessary, a comment, a question, an observation, and moved on. He was learning her pace. She was learning his. One morning he came into the Great Hall for breakfast and found her already there, alone at the Beauxbatons' end of the table, eating with the contained neatness of someone who takes meals seriously, and he sat across from her without asking, poured himself tea and said, "The first task is dragons." She went very still. Then she looked at him with the sharp, narrow attention of someone processing fast. "How do you know this?" "I have my methods." He said it without smugness, just factually. 4 dragons. 1 per champion. The task is to retrieve something from the nesting area. "You are certain?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. He could see her mind moving, cataloging dragon breeds, behavioral patterns, weaknesses, approach vectors. She was already working the problem. He appreciated that about her. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you're smart and you'll figure it out and prepare properly, and I'd rather you go into that arena with good information than bad." "You want me to do well," she said, testing the statement. "I want all 4 of you to come out of it alive," Naruto said. "Doing well is a secondary goal." She looked at him steadily. "You are not what I expected when I arrived at this school." "What did you expect?" "The usual." She said it with a flatness that contained a lot of history. British arrogance delivered with a smile. "I'm not British," Naruto said. "I mean, technically I am, but it's complicated." Her expression did the almost movement again. "You say that often, it's complicated." "It is. Perhaps," she said, picking up her tea, "you will explain it to me someday." "I'm planning on it," he said, "just not yet." She gave him a long, level look that was not unfriendly, then she went back to her breakfast. Harry got the dragon information through a more traditional route, Hagrid, somewhat inadvertently, with Hermione's help after, and prepared for the first task with the standard combination of terror and determination that Harry brought to most crises. Naruto helped him work through the thinking on the summoning charm approach, which was Harry's own idea and a good one, the kind of lateral thinking that the tournament's designers probably hadn't anticipated from a 14-year-old. You could just, Ron said one evening in the common room, gesturing loosely at Naruto. Whatever it is you do, it'd probably be faster. It's Harry's task, Naruto said. You keep saying that. It keeps being true. But what if, Ron? Naruto set down his quill. Do you know the difference between protecting someone and doing everything for them? Ron thought about it with the honest effort he brought to things that required actual thinking. One of them makes them stronger. Both of them might keep them alive in the moment. Only one of them actually helps. Ron absorbed this. That's very wise. I've made a lot of mistakes in that area, Naruto said, picking his quill back up. I know what it looks like when you get it wrong. The first task was on a Tuesday, and the morning of it the school had the particular stretched quality of a day that's going to be remembered. Naruto was awake before dawn, sat in the window of the Gryffindor dormitory watching the sky go light and ran his mind over the variables. 4 dragons, 4 champions. Harry had the summoning charm. Cedric had been told as well, because Harry had told him, which was the right thing to do, and Naruto had told Harry so with genuine approval, so Cedric would have his own plan. Crumb with his skill level would manage something. Fleur, he was not actually worried about Fleur. What she'd do in there would come from the same mind he'd been talking to for 2 weeks, and that mind didn't panic. She'd read the situation and find the cleanest path through it. He knew this about her already. What he was aware of, sitting in the window watching the sky go from black to gray to the particular thin gold of November morning, was that he was going to be very glad when she was back out of that arena. He examined this awareness with the honest attention he gave to things about himself that were new. He'd lived one full life. He'd been in love, he'd lost people he'd loved, he'd known the full range of what one person could feel for another. He recognized the early signatures. He wasn't going to pretend he didn't. He just didn't know yet what to do with it, which was unusual for him because he generally had a strong instinct for what to do with things. The arena was packed. He sat with the Gryffindors in the stands, and when Harry went first and produced the firebolt with the summoning charm and the crowd roared, he felt the familiar pride of watching someone do something brave and smart simultaneously. When Crumb went and reduced his dragon to a partly transfigured mess with a spell that was effective if inelegant, he respected the power behind it. When Fleur walked into the arena, the crowd did what crowds always did around her, a ripple of attention that was partly the Vila effect and partly the simple visual impact of watching someone who moved like they owned the air they were walking through. She faced a common Welsh green that outweighed her by approximately 9,000 pounds and didn't hesitate. What she did was extraordinary, and Naruto sat forward in his seat to watch it properly. She didn't attack the dragon. She didn't try to dodge it. She moved toward it, wand raised, and began a charm sequence that was not in any British textbook he'd read, long, complex, each component building on the last, and from across the arena he could feel the intent layering of it, the relational quality he'd noticed in that first welcoming feast. She wasn't commanding the dragon. She was talking to it at some frequency below speech. Some ancient Vila-adjacent magical resonance that pulled the creature's attention downward and held it there, and the dragon's eyes went half-closed and its massive head lowered, and she walked past it to the golden egg with the efficient calm of someone crossing a room. She came out with the egg and no injuries, and the crowd made a noise that was half amazement and half the kind of involuntary response you have when something is so completely done that it defies argument. Naruto exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. She walked out of the champions area and found him in the crowd before she found her headmistress, which he didn't analyze yet, just logged with the same careful honesty he'd been applying to the morning in the window. "Were you worried?" she asked, coming to stand beside him at the edge of the stands. "Yes," he said. She seemed to consider this. Around them the noise of the crowd was ongoing. Cedric had just gone and the Horntail was being dramatic about it. "You were worried about all of them," she said. "Yes. But not the same amount," he said, equally honest. That landed. He watched it land, watched the precise calculation of her face process what he'd said and what it meant, and this time the shift in her expression was larger than usual, not much, but enough to matter, enough to be something that wasn't performed composure. "Naruto Ashford," she said, his name in her accent, which made it sound like something different. "Still me," he said. She turned to look at the arena, at Cedric maneuvering with the dragon, and Naruto looked at the side of her face for a moment. The strong line of it, the particular quality of the light on her hair, the small indication in the set of her jaw that meant she was thinking about something with full attention, and then he looked at the arena too. Beside him, after a moment, she said, "Thank you for the information about the dragons." "Any time," he said, and she stopped. Restarted because Fleur Delacour was not someone who left sentences unfinished without reason, for not looking at me like the others do. He turned to look at her then and she met his gaze, and the gray of her eyes in the autumn light was the complicated gray of overcast sky that might do anything, clear or storm, you couldn't know yet. I see you, he said, just you not the other stuff. A long pause. Around them the tournament continued, Cedric's dragon letting out a roar that shook the stands. I know, she said quietly. That is the strange part. She went back to the Beauxbatons section a minute later, walking through the crowd with the habitual ease of someone who has learned to navigate rooms that watch them, and Naruto watched her go and then turned back to the arena where Cedric was in the final stages of his task. The tournament's first chapter was over. The real one, the one under the surface, the one involving Moody's wrong magical signature and Harry's unexpected fourth champion status and whatever was waiting for all of them at the end of it was only beginning. He had what he needed now. He had time and he had eyes on the situation, and he had Hermione and Harry and Ron and the slow, careful, honest thing developing between himself and the most interesting person he'd met in either of his lives. He wasn't afraid of what was coming. He'd never been particularly good at afraid. What he was, sitting in the stands as the last task scores were announced, and the crowd's energy began the long descent back toward ordinary, was simply present, fully, deliberately present in this world he'd been dropped into, in this life that was turning out to be worth the trouble, in this particular November afternoon where a silver-haired girl had said I know in a voice that meant something she wasn't ready to name yet. Neither was he, but they were both going to get there. Chapter 3, Fire Enough for Two. The champions' scores went up on the board that evening, Fleur third, Cedric and Harry joint first, Crumb second, and Naruto read them and made a private note that the judges had underscored Fleur's performance significantly. She'd done the cleanest, safest, most technically sophisticated thing in that arena, and she'd been docked points for it in ways he found transparently unfair. Not because it was less dramatic than a boy on a broomstick outrunning a horntail, it was less dramatic objectively, but because dramatic was being treated as synonymous with worthy, which was the kind of thinking that rewarded recklessness over intelligence. He didn't say this to her directly. She knew. He could tell she knew from the particular quality of composure she wore at dinner that night, perfect, unassailable, and held with a tightness that only showed if you were looking for it. The composure of someone who has decided that if the world is going to underestimate her, it will at least do so over her objections. He respected it. He also found it, specifically and privately, infuriating on her behalf. November moved through its remaining weeks in the damp, cold way of English autumns, and the school settled back into its ordinary rhythms around the tournament the way water settles around a stone, incorporating it, shaping itself to it, but continuing. Classes continued. Quidditch had been cancelled for the year, which produced a low-grade grievance that Naruto heard about at length from everyone who cared about Quidditch, which was essentially everyone. He listened with genuine sympathy and absolutely no personal stake in the matter. The Yule Ball was announced in the second week of November, which was an event Naruto had read about in the tournament histories and had therefore been expecting, but which hit the Gryffindor common room like a small contained explosion. The noise level and general social chaos that followed the announcement occupied enough of everyone's attention that he was able to use the next 3 evenings in relative peace to think through the Moody problem, which was becoming more pressing. The magical signature he'd been tracking had clarified. It was Polyjuice Potion. He'd worked that out by the sustained regularity of the transformation interval, the way the wrongness in the signature refreshed itself at consistent intervals during the day, layered over someone with a genuinely dark magical history. Not Voldemort's particular resonance, which he knew from Quirrell, but something adjacent. Someone who had operated in Voldemort's orbit for long enough that it had left marks on their magic the way radiation leaves marks on bone. He was building his evidence carefully. Going to Dumbledore with a suspicion was one thing, he'd done that with Quirrell. Going to him with a pattern was better. He documented the interval, the specific quality of the magical residue, the behavioral inconsistencies. The real Moody, according to everything in the historical record, was a man of violent paranoia but consistent principle. The Moody currently in this castle had principle selectively applied in ways that suggested someone performing a character rather than being one. On a Thursday evening he went to Dumbledore's office. The headmaster was reading when Naruto arrived and put down his book with the unhurried attention of someone for whom interruption was never an imposition when the interruption was interesting. Fox made a sound from his perch. You're moody, Naruto said, sitting down without waiting to be invited. Is not you're moody. Dumbledore was very still. Tell me, Naruto told him. The intervals, the residue, the behavioral pattern, the specific quality of what was underneath the polyjuice, everything he'd documented over 6 weeks. Dumbledore listened with the full, focused attention he gave to things that mattered, and when Naruto finished, he sat for a long moment with his fingers steepled. You have been building this case since September, Dumbledore said, since the 3rd week of term, and you chose to bring it now. I needed enough to be certain. Naruto met his eyes. I'm certain. Dumbledore looked at him with something that was part admiration and part a more complicated emotion, something like the awareness of being both grateful for and unsettled by what was sitting across the desk from him. What would you recommend? He asked, and it wasn't a rhetorical question. Don't move on him yet. If he's reporting to whoever is behind Harry's name in the goblet, and he is, the pattern is too specific to be coincidental, then moving on him before we understand the full plan tells whoever is directing this that we know. Let him run for now. Watch him. Let me keep tracking the intervals. When we know what the 3rd task is going to be used for, then we move. You are suggesting we allow a Death Eater to remain in this castle teaching children. I'm suggesting we allow a man who we know is not real moody to remain in his position while we understand what he's building toward. There's a difference. Naruto's voice was level. If he moves toward any of the students, I'll remove him myself. Mr. Ashford. Dumbledore's voice had a quality in it that wasn't quite a warning and wasn't quite amusement. You are 14 years old. I know, Naruto stood. It's still true. He left Dumbledore with things to think about and went back to the Gryffindor common room, where the Yule Ball preparation had reached a new phase of social complexity that he'd been aware was coming and had made a decision about. He needed a date. Not for the conventional reasons. He was comfortable in social situations and didn't particularly need the cover of a partner's presence to navigate them. But because the ball was also a gathering point, a place where the tournament's various moving pieces would be in one room, and he wanted to be present and free to observe rather than managing social obligations. There was also, if he was honest with himself, exactly one person he wanted to walk into that room with, and that person had not been asked yet by anyone who he thought was going to be adequate based on what he'd observed. He went to find Fleur the next morning. She was on the grounds, walking the perimeter of the lake with one of the other Beauxbaton's girls, a quieter girl named Giselle who seemed to function as Fleur's closest equivalent to a confidant, and who looked at Naruto's approach with the expression of someone who had been hearing about him. Naruto nodded to Giselle, who pressed her mouth together to contain something that might have been a smile, and fell into step beside Fleur. Yule Ball, he said. I have been asked 17 times, Fleur said, without any particular heat, just information. I know I'm asking 18. She looked at him sideways with the gray eyes that had started doing something different when they looked at him, a slight softening around the edges that she probably didn't know was visible to someone paying close attention. You are not going to be elaborate about this. Number, good, she looked back at the lake. I have heard the elaborate ones, they are very tedious. I imagine. You want to go together because you want someone interesting to talk to, she said, parsing his motivation with the accuracy she brought to most things. That's part of it, Naruto said. What is the other part? I want to walk into the room with you. A pause. The lake was very still in the morning, gray and flat, and the Beauxbaton's carriage was visible in the distance. Yes, she said. Yes to which part? Yes to the whole thing. She said it with the exact composure she brought to everything, but Giselle, half a step behind them, made a sound that she immediately converted into a cough. He smiled. Good, I have conditions, Fleur said. Tell me. You will not hover. I don't need protecting at a social event. Obviously. You will tell me honestly if something is bad, not politely, honestly, always. And she said, and here there was the smallest hesitation, so brief he might have missed it if he hadn't been specifically tracking her rhythms, you will dance with me, properly, not the shuffling that the British boys call dancing. He looked at her with what he was aware was probably an expression of complete delight, which was not an expression he'd worn often enough in this life yet. I grew up learning to dance in a world where dance was taken very seriously, he said, which was approximately true. The festival traditions of Konoha had involved enough formal movement that he had the foundations, and he'd refined them in the years of his previous life when there had been enough peace for things like festivals to happen again. Fleur's expression did something rare and complete. An actual smile, not performed, not the polished social one she deployed at distance, but a real one, quick and bright and gone again in seconds, like a match struck in a dark room. He carried it around for the rest of the day like a piece of found gold. The weeks between that conversation and the ball were the weeks when things between them became something with a proper shape to it. They were not cautious with each other, neither of them were people who did cautious, not about the things that actually mattered, but they were deliberate. Honest. They met in the library most evenings, because the library was where they'd started and it had the quality of established territory now. Madame Pince had stopped looking at Fleur with the suspicion she reserved for visitors from other schools, and had started looking at her with the grudging approval she reserved for people who treated books properly. Naruto had introduced them formally, which Fleur had found genuinely funny when he told her about it afterward. They talked about magic. This was always the backbone, the scaffolding everything else was built around, because it was where they were most honestly themselves. Naruto would work through a theoretical problem and Fleur would come at it from the Bobaton's angle, the relational model, and the combination of their approaches produced things neither of them got to alone. She'd asked him one evening about the intent layering she'd used on the dragon and whether it would transfer to non-creature subjects. The principle transfers, he said. The technique doesn't. With creatures you're working with instinct, the resonance you're producing is basically a very sophisticated biological signal. With a person you've got cognition on top of instinct which disrupts the frequency. So with a person you would need, different tool entirely, not resonance, something more like actual communication. He paused, which, if you think about it, you're better at than most people give you credit for. She looked at him steadily. You are doing the thing you do. What thing? Where you give me an honest compliment and then immediately make it about the skill rather than the person so that it is easier to accept. He blinked. Then he laughed, a real one, short and surprised. You caught that. I catch most things. She held his gaze. You do not need to be careful with your words around me, Naruto. I am not fragile. I know you're not fragile, he said. That's not why I do it. Then why? He thought about it honestly. Because the things I actually want to say to you are things I'm still working out whether to say yet. The quality of the silence that followed this was something he could have mapped. The specific texture of two people standing at the edge of a thing that hasn't been named yet, both of them aware of it, neither of them ready to move but neither of them backing up either. When you have worked it out, she said, her voice steady and completely genuine, you should say them. I will, he said, and meant it. She went back to her notes. He went back to his theory. The library settled around them in its particular companionable quiet. 2 weeks before the ball, Hermione came to him in the common room with the expression of someone who wanted to ask something but was organizing the approach. He waited. You're going with Fleur Delacour, Hermione said. Yes. The Bobaton's champion? I know which Fleur Delacour she is, Hermione. She sat down across from him with her hands folded, which was her serious discussion posture. She's part Vila, I know. And you're, she searched for the right word, not affected. Hermione looked at him with the analytical attention she applied to problems she genuinely wanted to understand. How? Because the Vila effect is magical and compulsive and affects everyone who, Hermione. He said it gently. You know that I'm not a standard case. I know you're not a standard case, she said. I've known that since the train first year. She stopped, restarted. She's got a reputation. I know what her reputation is, and I know Fleur Delacour. He said it simply, not the reputation she's extraordinary. She's also the loneliest person in this school, which everyone overlooks because they're busy projecting onto her. He met Hermione's eyes. Sound familiar? Hermione was quiet for a moment, then with the honesty she brought to her own self-understanding, a bit. Yeah, he picked up his quill. She's not what people think she is and what she actually is happens to be much better. I'm interested in the real thing. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. You really like her. I really like her. Does she really like you? I think so. He paused. She's working through some things about trusting people. I'm not in a hurry. Hermione absorbed this. Then she nodded with the decisive quality of someone closing a question she's resolved. For what it's worth, she said, I think she probably just needs someone who doesn't treat her like an event. That's exactly it, Naruto said. Yes. The night of the Yule Ball arrived in a cold, clear December dark, the ground silvered with frost, the sky absolutely crowded with stars. Naruto got dressed in the Gryffindor dormitory with the lack of drama he brought to most physical things. Dress robes in deep blue, which his mother had sent from Wiltshire along with a note that said be charming, darling, I know you know how, and went to meet Fleur in the entrance hall. She was already there when he arrived. She was wearing silver robes that had no business being as simple as they looked. The simplicity was the result of extraordinary craft, something you could only tell by looking carefully at the way the fabric moved, and her hair was up, pinned with something that caught the candlelight. She was standing slightly apart from the other Bobaton students, in the particular spatial arrangement she defaulted to in crowds, accessible but not surrounded. She saw him across the hall and she looked at him with the same straight, clear attention she'd given him from the very first, and he crossed to her and didn't say anything complimentary about how she looked, which made her eyes do the complicated thing. "You're not going to say anything?" she asked. "You know how you look," he said. "You don't need me to tell you." "No," she agreed, "but people usually feel compelled." "I'm going to tell you something better than how you look," he said. "You ready?" She raised one fine eyebrow. "You seem happy," he said. "Actually happy, not the performance." She looked at him, and the thing that happened to her face was not the near smile, not the contained shift. It was a real expression, full and unguarded and gone quickly, but having been there unmistakably. "You are very strange," she said. "I know," he said, and offered his arm, and she took it. They walked into the great hall together, and it was, he would not lie to himself about this, its own particular pleasure. Not the spectacle of it, not the effect they apparently had on the room, he was aware of it, couldn't help being, when both of them being visible produced a kind of atmospheric ripple, but the simple specific pleasure of walking into a place with her beside him, and knowing she was choosing to be there. They sat at the champions' table for the opening, Harry with Parvati, Cedric with Cho, Krum with Hermione. That last one had made Naruto smile privately for days. He'd known Hermione for 3 years. He'd watched Krum watch her from the Durmstrang table with the kind of focus normally reserved for tactical targets. He was glad she'd said yes. She deserved someone who found her genuinely fascinating. And Krum, beneath the intimidating Quidditch legend exterior, was a serious-minded person who was bored by people who didn't challenge him. Dinner was excellent, and the conversation at their end of the table was better, because Naruto had introduced Hermione and Fleur properly the week before the ball, and the two of them had been talking magical theory for an hour before they'd remembered to include anyone else. Now they continued variations on that conversation across the table, with Harry occasionally contributing and Krum listening with the expression of someone who follows 3/4 of the conversation and is quietly delighted by the quarter he doesn't. When the dinner finished and the Weird Sisters started and the floor opened up, Naruto stood and extended his hand to Fleur, and she looked at it and then up at him and then stood. He danced well. He'd always been better at physical things than he ever got credit for. The control, the awareness of space, the ability to move in precise relationship to something else. All of that came from the same training that had made him a shinobi, refined now into a different form. He held her correctly, moved with her rather than directing her, and after the first 8 bars she relaxed by a fraction that probably only he could measure, and they found a shared rhythm that was its own kind of conversation. "You were not lying about the dancing," she said. "I don't lie. Everyone lies." "I don't," he said simply. "I've been around enough people who did it by instinct to know what it costs long term." She considered this as they moved. "And when a truth would hurt someone, then I'm honest about the fact that I'm not going to say the thing," he said. "But I don't substitute a comfortable false thing. That's a different problem." "Honesty about your silences," she said. "That is very precise. I've had a long time to think about ethics," he said, which was truer than she knew. She was quiet for a moment, following the music's shift into a slower section without any awkwardness, the distance between them adjusting naturally. "My mother is Vila," she said. "Full Vila. My father is human. When I was small, people would come to see her to see them together, and sometimes they would look at me the way people look at something that does not quite fit." She said it without inflection, purely factual. "A beautiful human woman and a beautiful Vila and a daughter who was both and neither. Interesting," they said, "like I was a specimen. And then you grew up," he said, and the interesting became a different kind of staring, but it was still staring. "Yes," she looked at him. "You understand that specifically." "I was an invisible person before I was a visible one," he said. "Both directions are their own kind of alone." They danced for another moment in silence that was not empty. It was the full kind, the kind where two people are saying things without words, which was its own language and one he'd become fluent in across 2 lifetimes. "What were you before?" she asked. "You say things like that long time before other direction. You speak sometimes like someone much older than 14. "I am someone much older than 14, he said. She leaned back to look at his face, and he let her look, with the openness he brought to her specifically. "I believe you," she said, which was its own small extraordinary thing. Not "I believe that you mean that," or "I believe something strange is true about you," but flatly, completely, "I believe you." "I told you I'd explain it when there was enough trust," he said. "There is enough trust," she said. "I do not give it easily, and I am giving it." He heard this for exactly what it was, not an ultimatum, an offering stated with Fleur's characteristic directness and accepted or declined on equal terms. "Okay," he said, "not here but soon." Soon, she agreed and they continued dancing, and he did not think about the fact that she was probably the first person in this world to whom he was going to say the full truth, because thinking about it made him feel something large and complicated, and he needed to be functional for the rest of the evening. They danced 3 more times over the course of the night. In between, they talked to Harry, who was having a complicated evening involving Cho Chang and something about the tournament that was pressing on him. They talked to Cedric, who was thoughtful and genuine, and who Naruto liked with the straightforward quality he reserved for people who didn't perform their decency. He and Fleur ate dessert at a small table near the ice sculpture of the Hogwarts crest and talked about nothing specific and everything relevant, the way conversations go when both people are paying attention. At the end of the night, they walked out into the cold corridor together and their breath made small clouds in the air, and Fleur stopped at the junction where they would separate, her to the Beauxbatons' quarters, him to Gryffindor Tower, and turned to him. "Thank you," she said. "What for specifically?" "For this," she gestured, a slight motion that encompassed the evening, the dancing, the conversation, all of it. "For making it feel like something I was part of rather than something being done to me." He looked at her in the corridor light, the frost-bright air between them, and said, "Fleur, the only times I've ever been at an event like that in my life and actually been present for it, not watching, not managing, not operating, it was when the person with me made it real. You did that tonight, thank you." The gray eyes looked at him, and in the quiet of the corridor, away from the crowd and the music, she closed the step between them and stood up and kissed his cheek. Not shy, not performed, just an honest moment, quick and warm against his cold, chilled face. Then she stepped back with her composure perfectly reinstated, which was impressive given what had just shifted. "Good night, Naruto," she said. "Good night, Fleur," he said. He walked back to Gryffindor Tower with the particular quiet interior of someone who has just had something change and knows it has changed but hasn't yet worked out what to do with the knowledge. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the opposite of uncomfortable. It was the feeling of standing somewhere good and knowing where you were. He did not tell Harry and Ron about it when he got back to the dormitory, because Ron was still processing the evening's own drama, something involving Hermione, and a fight in Victor Crumb that Naruto did not fully get the details of until breakfast, and Harry was quiet in the way of someone carrying something he hadn't found words for yet. He lay in his four-poster in the dark and thought about 2 things simultaneously, the way he'd always been able to think about multiple things at once. The first thing was Fleur and the warmth on his cheek, and the conversation still running in his head like a river that hadn't decided where it was going yet. The second thing was what he'd felt when they'd come out of the great hall into the corridor, a resonance in the castle's deep wards, something like what he'd felt before the first task, the calibrating of a trap's components. The tournament's 3rd task was being prepared, and whatever fake Moody was doing to its design, the shape of it was becoming clearer. Something was going to happen at the end of the maze. Something that Harry was going to be in the middle of that involved a ritual and a body and the specific dark resonance he'd felt in the Voldemort fragment inside Quirrell 3 years ago. He was going to be ready for it. He fell asleep thinking about the fox silver smile that had appeared and disappeared so quickly on a face that mostly kept itself still, and thinking about the particular texture of specific dark magic that wanted to be a body again. Both things, both entirely real, both his to deal with. December concluded, the Christmas holidays arrived, and the school emptied in the way it always did, not completely, Harry and several others staying, and this year Fleur staying as well, which he found out on December 23rd when he came down to the Great Hall for breakfast, and she was there at the otherwise empty Beauxbatons section of the table, alone with a book and tea. He sat across from her. She looked up. "You're staying," he said. "My family are visiting relatives in Lyon who are—" She paused. "Difficult, I prefer this." "I'm staying too." "I know," she said and looked back at her book. "I checked." He hid his expression in his own tea. They spent the holiday weeks in a different rhythm than term provided, slower, less structured, the castle half empty and half lit, the grounds beautiful under their heavy frost. They walked in the mornings, which started as a practical thing and became a tradition in the space of 2 days. They walked the lake perimeter, and the grounds toward the forest edge, and once up the path toward the astronomy tower where the view in the winter morning light was extraordinary, and Fleur stood looking at it with her arms folded against the cold, and her face fully open in the way it only was when she wasn't managing a room. "Tell me," she said on a morning 3 days after Christmas, looking out at the frozen grounds, "about before." They were sitting on the astronomy tower's lower parapet, the cold sharp enough to make their breath visible, the sky a blue that had never quite decided if it wanted to be gray. So he told her. Not everything. Not all at once, that was too large, the whole shape of a previous life, too unwieldy to hand to someone at once. But the essential things, that he had lived before entirely and completely as someone else in a world entirely unlike this one. That he had been a ninja, he had to explain what that meant and did it with the matter-of-factness of a man describing a profession, and watched her eyes shift as the picture assembled. That he had carried something inside him, a great and ancient being, a source of power that had changed him at a fundamental level, and that even after that being was gone, what remained was still significant. That he had been something like a leader at the end, and had lost people he loved in the way that was only possible when you have genuinely loved people. That he had arrived in this world with all of it intact, every memory, every skill, every grief. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things he'd identified early as one of her genuine gifts, the ability to be still while someone was saying something, to give the whole of her attention without trying to direct it. When he finished, there was a long quiet with the cold air in it and the distant sound of the frozen lake. "You are older than this world thinks you are," she said. "Yes. And the power you carry," she looked at him with the clinical attention that she brought to things she was genuinely assessing, "is not magic, not what I would call magic. It's compatible with magic," he said. "They interact in ways I'm still mapping, but it comes from a different source, a different system. And you are," she thought about the right word, "diminished in this body compared to what you were. Significantly, still significant," she finished. Then, with the directness that was one of the things he'd never stop being grateful for, "Does it frighten you, being here?" Being, she gestured at him, at his youth, at the body he was operating this when you remember being something else. He thought about it honestly. "In the beginning, yes, a little, not the power difference that I can work with. He searched for it, the absence, the people I can't see anymore. But not now, he said and looked at her. "I have reasons to be here, real ones." She held his gaze in the cold morning light for a long moment and then looked away, out at the white grounds. And he could see her processing, not doubting, not disbelieving, but integrating, fitting what he'd told her into the shape of who she knew him to be and finding that it fit cleanly. "In France," she said eventually, "there is a tradition, Vila tradition, about meeting a person who sees you entirely. Not the inheritance, not the appearance, not what you can do, you, the full thing." She was very still. "My grandmother told me that when it happens you do not need to manage it, you simply know." He didn't say anything. The morning did its work around them, quiet and cold and bright. "I think," she said, carefully, like each word was being selected with full precision, "that I have not been seen clearly by very many people in my life. And I think that you," another pause, "do not have the problem that most people have with me." "The problem most people have with you," he said, "is that they see the first thing and stop. I'm bad at stopping." "I know," she looked at him again. "I'm glad." There was a moment then in the cold morning on the astronomy tower that had the quality of something becoming official, not dramatic, not named. Just the mutual acknowledgement of two people standing in a place they'd gotten to together and neither of them walking away from it. January arrived. Term restarted, the school filled back up, the ordinary noise of Hogwarts in full session returned. Things between them were different now in a way that didn't change their outward form much. They still met in the library, still walked in the mornings, still argued about magical theory with the enthusiasm of people who genuinely loved the argument. But there was a ground under it now, something settled. The other Hogwarts students noticed, with the accuracy that communal living gives people about each other's business. Harry noticed and said nothing, which was its own form of support. Ron noticed and said something tactless about Vila auras that Naruto corrected without malice and Ron immediately regretted. Hermione noticed and said privately, "Good," in the voice she used when she'd done her own analysis and arrived at an answer she approved of. Crumb noticed too and asked Naruto about it with the bluntness of someone who communicated straightforwardly and expected the same in return. They were in the library, it was January, a Tuesday, and Crumb simply sat down across from him and said, "You and Delacour." "Yes," Naruto said. "She is." Crumb searched for the word, "not easy to know." Naruto looked up from his book. "She's worth the effort." Crumb nodded slowly with the gravity of someone who had made his own assessment and found it consistent. "She is serious," he said. "Not many people are serious, they play at things." "Yeah," Naruto said, "I know what you mean." It was, in its way, a conversation between people who understood each other on the basis of a shared quality, the particular seriousness of people who have always been most themselves in difficult situations, who thrive in the places others find intolerable. They were not going to be close friends, Victor Crumb and Naruto Ashford, but they were going to respect each other, and in Naruto's experience that was actually more useful. February came with the announcement of the second task's date, and the school went back into tournament mode. And somewhere underneath all of it, the preparation, the ongoing moody tracking, the regular evening conversations with Fleur, the quiet accumulation of days that were worth having, the current ran toward the end of the year, toward whatever waited in the maze. Naruto could feel it. The timing, the preparation, the pieces assembling toward their designed conclusion. He'd mapped most of it by now. The third task was the trap. The maze was the container. The portkey, because that was what Fake Moody was building toward. A portkey embedded in the cup. A transportation mechanism designed to move Harry to a location where a ritual could be performed. A ritual that would use Harry's blood to rebuild a body for something that had been looking for a body for 13 years. He told Dumbledore all of this in February, in the clearest terms he had, and Dumbledore had listened with the expression of a man confirming what he already feared. "You know what happens at the end of the maze," Dumbledore said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Naruto said, "and you intend to be there." "Yes." A long pause. Fawkes sang one phrase, low and complex. "I cannot stop you," Dumbledore said. "No," Naruto agreed. "But I'm not going to let it happen the way it's designed to. Harry's going to touch the cup. I think it needs to play out that way. Stopping it too early tells them we know and they adapt and try again somewhere we can't see. But when he gets there, he stopped. I'll be there." "How?" Dumbledore asked, not skeptically, genuinely curious about the mechanism. "I have my ways," Naruto said, which he was aware was not a complete answer and also was exactly as much as he was prepared to say, because some explanations required demonstration and this was one of them. Dumbledore looked at him across the width of a very old desk and said quietly, "Be careful, Naruto." It was the first time the headmaster had used his first name. He filed this alongside everything else he was holding: Fleur's kiss in the cold corridor, Crumb's serious nod, Harry's green eyes saying you were there, all the specific weight of this world making itself real. "Always am," he said. This was, depending on your definition, not entirely accurate. He had never been particularly careful in the way people meant when they said it. He had always moved toward the danger, which was its own kind of care, the care of the person who decides that if something terrible is going to happen, it's going to happen with them standing in its path. March, April, the maze's construction visible from the Quidditch pitch, the hedges grown to enormous height, Fleur watching it from the window of the library one evening with an expression he read as the specific mixture of courage and clarity that constituted her version of readiness. "Are you ready for it?" he asked. She turned from the window. "Yes." "Then, are you ready for what comes after?" He looked at her. "What do you think comes after?" "Something that isn't a tournament," she said, because she was sharp and she'd been watching and she'd put together enough pieces to know that what was waiting at the end of the maze wasn't a cup and a title. "Something that changes things." "Yes," he said. She nodded once, turned back to the window. He crossed to stand beside her and they looked out at the maze together, at the looming dark of the hedges in the evening light, and neither of them said anything more about it. There was nothing more to say that was better than standing there together, looking at what was coming without flinching. He was ready, she was ready. Whatever was coming was going to find both of them already there, feet planted, eyes forward. He thought privately that whatever ancient force or accident or cosmic joke had dropped him into this new life might possibly have known what it was doing. He was not going to argue with the evidence. Chapter 4, What the Dark Keeps. The morning of the second task arrived the way most important mornings do, entirely ordinary on the surface, unremarkable in its weather and light, the kind of morning that doesn't announce itself as significant until you're already in the middle of what it contains. Naruto was awake before the sun. He'd slept 4 hours, which was enough. He'd trained his body's recovery rate over 2 lifetimes of not getting adequate sleep, and he sat in the window of the Gryffindor dormitory in the gray pre-dawn and ran through everything he knew about what the second task required. An hour, something precious, the lake. He'd worked out the gillyweed solution 3 weeks before the task and given the information to Neville, who had given it to Harry with the nervous enthusiasm of someone contributing something important. He'd made sure the path to that solution was Neville's, because Neville needed the confidence more than Naruto needed the credit. Harry had practiced in the prefect's bathroom and confirmed the basic mechanics and was as prepared as he could reasonably be. Fleur had her own approach, which she had not shared with him in detail, not because she was keeping secrets. She'd been clear that it was her task and she was working her own strategy, and he respected this entirely. He'd offered resources, she'd declined, and that was the end of it. He'd liked that about the interaction. She didn't need his help to be capable. She knew it and he knew it, and neither of them made it complicated. What he was thinking about now, in the window, was not strategy. He was thinking about the feeling that had been building since February, a low-register awareness in his chakra sense, the particular frequency of very deep water over a very large space, and what might be in it that the tournament designers expected to be a genuine threat. He'd read everything the library had on the Black Lake's ecosystem, which was where Fleur's research had taken her to on the first night they'd spoken. Giant squid, obviously. Grindylows, water demons, small and vicious and fast, not individually dangerous but collectively a serious problem. And in the deeper parts, the merpeople. A full colony of merpeople, intelligent and territorial, and in the context of a tournament designed around life-threatening challenges, very possibly part of the intended obstacle structure. He stretched in the window, feeling his muscles respond, feeling the river of chakra run through him. He'd refined it considerably over 3.5 years of daily practice. The precision of it now significantly better than what he'd had at the start, the control closer to what he'd had in his previous life. He was not at his peak. He was not going to be, not in this body for some years yet, but he was substantial and he knew exactly what he was working with, which was its own kind of readiness. He dressed in the dark and went down to the common room, which was empty, and sat with his back to the fire and thought about the fact that Fleur was going into that lake this morning, which was a piece of information he was choosing to treat as neutral. He was doing a mediocre job of treating it as neutral. The lake in February was not the lake of summer. It was a thing of fundamental cold, the kind of cold that doesn't register as temperature so much as intention, as the dark conviction of deep water that has never been warm and sees no reason to start. Naruto had been in worse. He had trained in environments that would have killed a normal person before the experience of them became interesting. But the lake was specifically, impressively hostile in its own way, and the champions were going to be submerged in it for an hour. He went to breakfast early and was at the table when Harry came down, eyes shadowed, still working through his plan in the way of someone whose mental rehearsal hasn't reached a comfortable ending yet. He sat across from Naruto and didn't say anything. "Gillyweed works for exactly an hour," Naruto said. "Don't cut it close." "I know, the merpeople's colony is in the deepest section. The thing they're holding will be near the center of the settlement." Harry looked up. "How do you? I've been mapping the lake for a month." Naruto pushed a plate of toast toward him. "Go northwest from the starting point. The deepest channel runs that direction. Don't fight the Grindylows, they're fast enough that engagement wastes time, and time is the variable you can least afford to lose." Harry ate a piece of toast with the automatic quality of someone whose body is running on background function while his mind is elsewhere. "Ron's down there," he said. "They've taken Ron." "I know, you'll get him. You know that?" "Yes," Naruto said simply. Harry looked at him with the specific quality of someone deciding whether to call this on its lack of evidential basis, then visibly deciding it didn't matter right now and going back to his toast. This was one of the things Naruto appreciated about Harry, the ability to accept certainty from a reliable source without needing its architecture explained. Practical, efficient, suited to moments like this one. "What about Fleur?" Harry asked. "What about her?" Harry's expression was careful in the specific way of someone trying to discuss a sensitive subject without getting it wrong. "She's you're going to, she's Fleur," Naruto said. "She'll be fine." "Right," Harry said, in the tone of a person who is not entirely sure that Naruto believes this and also knows that questioning it will accomplish nothing useful. Fleur arrived at breakfast with Giselle and 2 other Bobaton students, ate with her characteristic efficiency and met Naruto's eyes across the hall once. He tilted his head in the slight question, "How are you?" She returned the slight acknowledgement, ready. That was their language now, the compressed version, and he was glad they had it. The champions gathered at the lake's edge at 9:30. The stands had been erected on the bank and were filling with the school's population, colorful in their winter robes, breath clouding in the cold February air, the particular noise of a crowd that's anticipating something and isn't entirely sure what shape the anticipation should take. Naruto found a position in the stands near the water, close enough to the lake's surface that he could extend his sense into it, which he did immediately, moving his awareness downward through the dark water like a line cast into depth. He felt the cold. He felt the enormous quiet of deep water. He felt the specific living signatures. The squid's vast slow pulse somewhere in the eastern deeps, the Grindylows clustered in the shallower weed beds, the merpeople's colony in the northwest just as he'd mapped, and the 4 people-shaped signatures anchored near the colony's center, the hostages, their heartbeats slow and steady with whatever enchantment was maintaining them. He identified them. Hermione, Ron, Cho Chang, and Gabrielle Delacour. He had not known that part. He felt at land the specific information that what was in the lake belonging to Fleur was her little sister, who was 8 years old and whose heartbeat he could feel, slow and safe but there in the dark water, and he let it land cleanly and then continued his assessment because feeling things and being functional had never been mutually exclusive for him. Madame Pomfrey started the timer. The champions went in. He tracked all 4 of them. He had enough range now, 4 years of refinement, daily work, the accumulated precision of someone who had once been able to feel an entire battlefield with his awareness, to hold all 4 signatures simultaneously and register what was happening around each of them. Harry descending fast with the gillyweed working. Crumb transfiguring himself partially in a way that worked but not elegantly. Cedric moving well with a bubblehead charm. And Fleur's descent was the cleanest of the 4. She was moving with the confidence of someone who had prepared specifically for this, her magical signature shifting in the way he recognized as the intent layering she'd told him about, not fighting the water but entering into relationship with it, adjusting her body's interaction with the environment rather than imposing on it. He felt a particular quality to her progress, something almost like watching her think, and he tracked it with a concentrated attention that had nothing to do with tactics and everything to do with the specific person in the water. 20 minutes in, things changed. Crumb reached his hostage and was heading back, efficient if mechanical. Cedric was through the Grindylow field. Harry had managed an encounter with the Grindylows and was moving again. And Fleur, her signature stopped. Not stopped. She was still there, still alive, heartbeat present and strong. But her movement had ceased and the signatures around her had shifted. He pushed his awareness harder, reading the texture of what was near her, Grindylows, not 2 or 3. A large cluster, a dozen or more, and they had her from multiple directions simultaneously, the kind of multi-point engagement that made it very difficult to establish the concentration required for complex charm work. She was managing them. He could feel the effort in her signature. She was doing something focused and effective and it was working, but it was costing her time, and the thing about time was that she only had an hour's worth of it and Gabrielle was still at the colony's center waiting. He did the math. He did it fast, the way he'd always done battlefield mathematics, the clean, cold calculus of time and distance and what was possible. At current rate, with the Grindylow engagement eating minutes, Fleur would not reach her hostage in time, not with margin enough for the return trip. The task's rules were that uncollected hostages would surface unharmed after an hour, so Gabrielle was safe regardless, but Fleur wouldn't know that in the water in the dark with her sister on the other side of a cluster of water demons and a closing clock. He was moving before he finished the calculation, not dramatically. He stood from his seat in the stands, which was quick and drew some attention from nearby students, and walked to the water's edge. Bagman was somewhere behind him saying something about the task's progress. Naruto took his outer robe off, folded it, left it on the bank, and went into the lake. The cold was extraordinary. It hit like a physical argument. Not just cold, but the specific aggressive cold of deep water that wanted to end you. And Naruto moved through it with the focused indifference of someone redirecting chakra into his core temperature and continuing. He didn't need gillyweed. He'd spent 3 weeks working out a modified chakra compression technique that maintained a thin breathable layer at his face while allowing full submersion, not elegant, not permanent, but functional for the time he needed. He went down. The lake at depth was a different world. Darker than the surface darkness, a blue-gray that swallowed detail and cold enough that it pressed in on him from every direction with the insistence of something that didn't want to be navigated. He extended his chakra sense fully and moved northwest, using the same reading of the lake's topology he'd developed from the surface, navigating by sense rather than sight. He found Fleur in 4 minutes. She was in a weed bed 10 meters below the surface, and she was doing exactly what he'd known she'd be doing, fighting with the precise, controlled efficiency of someone who was not panicking but was running out of options. The Grindylows were fast and they came in from multiple angles, and she was managing 2, 3 at a time with her wand, buying space and losing it and buying it again. She had cuts on one hand from a claw. He came in from above and behind the cluster. He didn't use magic. He used chakra-enhanced physical movement, a speed and precision that the Grindylows couldn't track because it didn't have the magical signature they were designed to respond to, and he moved through the cluster with the efficiency of someone who had dealt with things vastly more dangerous than water demons that were approximately the size of a toddler. Not violent. He redirected, displaced, put them into each other's trajectories with the minimal force required to produce maximum chaos. and in the space of about 40 seconds the cluster had scattered into the weed bed in the particular disordered way of creatures that have encountered something their instincts don't have a category for. Fleur turned and found him there. He could see her face clearly. The bubblehead charm kept the water from her face, and in the dim lake light her expression was the one she got when she was rapidly updating an assessment. He held up his hands. I know, but you were running out of time. She looked at him, at his lack of any visible breathing apparatus, at the chakra shimmer that was probably visible to someone as magically sensitive as her at this range. And her expression did something complicated and then resolved into the particular focus of someone who has filed a large question for later and returned to the immediate problem. She pointed, northwest, her sister. He nodded. They went together. Moving alongside her was its own education. She was fast, genuinely fast, and she compensated for the water's resistance with the relational magic beautifully. He could see it operating even through the murk, the way the water's own current seemed to agree with her movement rather than opposing it. She'd done significant work on this specific problem. He moved alongside her and matched her pace, and they covered the distance toward the colony in a silence that was not silent. The lake made sounds, deep tonal things, the particular language of merpeople audible as pressure in his chest at this depth. The colony appeared out of the darkness like a city appearing out of fog. Stone structures, the kind that had been growing for centuries rather than built, and the merpeople surrounding them watching as the champions came, with the territorial awareness of people in their own home encountering uninvited guests. They were striking in the way of things that had evolved to be exactly what they were, gray, powerful carrying spears that had the quality of serious weapons rather than props. The hostages were tied to a stone pillar in the colony's center. Naruto could see them, Ron, Hermione, Cho, and Gabrielle, the last one small and fair-haired even in the water's gray light, her eyes closed, still and safe. The merpeople moved to block them. Not all of them, just the group surrounding the hostages, the guards, who arranged themselves with the disciplined precision of people who had done this before and were following rules. Naruto read the situation in a second. This was part of the task's design, an obstacle but a navigable one, not actually intended to prevent the champions from reaching their hostages so much as to make the reaching require something specific. Fleur moved forward and he stayed slightly back, reading it, letting her take the lead because this was hers and he was here in support capacity only. She addressed the merpeople in something he hadn't expected, not English, not French, some angular, pressure-built language that sat at the bottom register of hearing, a partial approximation of Mermish, imperfect but recognizable enough. He watched the merpeople's posture shift from blocking to assessing, the way you watch a room recalibrate when someone does something that changes the terms of engagement. One of the elder merpeople, a gray-bearded figure who carried himself with the authority of someone everyone else deferred to, looked at Fleur with the attention of someone hearing an unusual thing, and then looked at Naruto, who had not moved and was not using his chakra actively, simply present in the way of someone who is clearly not a threat and knows it. The elder said something back. Fleur's response came slower, working through the language at the edge of her competence, but she got it out. The merpeople moved aside. She went to Gabrielle immediately, cut the rope with a severing charm, caught her sister's small body, held her, and in the dark water for a fraction of a second, Fleur's composure went entirely, and what was underneath it was unguarded and raw and completely human. She held her sister in the cold dark and pressed her face against Gabrielle's hair, and the thing in her expression was not the polished Bobaton's champion, not the Triwizard competitor, not the too beautiful girl who managed rooms from a distance. It was just Fleur, just her, loving her sister in the way that was its own whole world. Naruto looked away. Not because the moment embarrassed him, but because it belonged to her and he wasn't going to observe what she hadn't offered. He watched the merpeople instead, who were watching with what seemed like genuine interest, and one of them, younger, curious, swam close enough to study him with the direct assessment of a child who hasn't learned to be subtle about scrutiny. He met the merperson's eyes and nodded once. The merperson made a sound that might have been the mermish equivalent of acknowledgement. Fleur tapped his shoulder. He turned. She had Gabrielle secured against her, and her face was fully composed again, the composure back in place like armor after a private moment, but her eyes were different. Something had opened in them at depth that was still open now, something she hadn't locked back down because she hadn't decided to yet. She tilted her head toward the surface. Let's go. He had enough chakra compression left for the ascent. He moved alongside her through the increasingly light water as they rose, Gabrielle's weight slowing Fleur slightly, and he stayed close in case she needed not help. She didn't need help, but presence. She didn't need to do the last stretch alone. They broke the surface into cold February air, and the crowd's noise hit them both simultaneously. Gabrielle gasped back into consciousness, the moment her face cleared the water, and immediately grabbed Fleur's neck with both arms, and said something rapid in French that Naruto caught enough of to understand was essentially "Don't ever do that to me again," directed at the situation generally. And Fleur held her and spoke back in quick, low French that was nothing like her English, looser, warmer, entirely unself-conscious. And they floated there in the cold lake for a moment while the crowd processed what had come up from the water. Naruto trod water beside them and said nothing. Fleur looked at him over Gabrielle's shoulder with the gray eyes that were open and raw and directly on him in a way that didn't try to be anything other than what it was. "You came in," she said. "You were running out of time," he said. I know you would have," he said, "but you would have had to choose between your sister and your safety, and that's a choice I didn't want you to make." A pause, Gabrielle still attached to her neck, the cold water moving around all three of them. "You don't do things without thinking about them," she said. "You were watching from the surface and you calculated when to move." "Yes. That is," she searched for the word, and what she settled on was the one he hadn't expected: kind. "That is a very specific kind of kind." He held her gaze. The water was cold, it didn't matter. "I told you," he said. "I see you, the whole thing. I see what you were carrying in that water, and I wasn't going to let you carry it alone if I could help it." Gabrielle, apparently understanding that something significant was happening around her, went quiet and looked between them with the enormous-eyed attention of an 8-year-old who has just woken up from an enchanted sleep and found herself in the middle of something her sister hasn't explained yet. "Qui est il?" she asked Fleur. "Who is he?" Fleur looked at Naruto. Something in her expression was making a decision. "Il est Naruto," she said. "He is Naruto. Et alors, and so, et alors," Fleur said with the ghost of something that was almost a smile. "Il est important. He is important." Gabrielle looked at him with the assessment of an 8-year-old conducting due diligence and then said in accented but perfectly serviceable English, "You have very strange hair." "I know," Naruto said. "It is nice though," she added generously. "Thank you," he said. Fleur's expression broke open for exactly 1 second. A real laugh, brief and full and the most unguarded he'd ever seen her. And then Madame Pomfrey was there with warming charms and towels and the organized urgency of the medical professional taking charge of a situation. And the moment dissolved into the managed noise of people coming out of the lake, and the stands emptying and the scores going up. She scored 23 points out of 40, second to last, because she hadn't retrieved her hostage in time, officially. The judges didn't know about the Grindelow delay, and Naruto noted their scoring with the flat displeasure he'd had about the first task's scores and filed it alongside everything else he was holding about the tournament's fundamental fairness problem. He didn't say anything about it in public. Fleur didn't either, which he respected. Harry came in and performed the exact kind of excessive heroism that was Harry's specific gift, saving both Ron and Gabrielle when Fleur didn't arrive, which earned him significant credit from the judges, and Naruto felt the familiar warmth of watching Harry do the right thing in the Harry way, which was to say without thinking about it too hard and without asking for credit afterward. Madame Pomfrey established a medical triage area near the bank and Naruto sat wrapped in a towel, unnecessary because his core temperature was already regulated, watching Gabrielle be attended to by the Mediwitch while Fleur sat beside her holding her hand. He was perhaps 10 feet away, not intrusive, present, and Fleur glanced at him every few minutes with the quick specific look she developed for him, the one that said "I know you're there" without saying it out loud. Dumbledore appeared at Naruto's shoulder as silently as the man always managed despite being significantly tall and wearing elaborate robes. "You went into the lake," Dumbledore said conversationally. "Yes," without any breathing apparatus visible to observation. "Yes. And you moved at a speed that several witnesses are currently finding difficult to describe." "The Grindelows had her pinned," Naruto said. "She was going to run out of time." A pause. Dumbledore looked at him with the complicated attention that had been building in their interactions for 4 years, the accumulated weight of someone who was still in the process of understanding what he was dealing with. "You are protective of her," he said. "She's important to me," Naruto said. "Yes," Dumbledore said gently. "I can see that." He looked at Fleur and Gabrielle for a moment. "She is, for what it is worth, a remarkable young woman." "I know," Naruto said. "That's the point." Dumbledore left. Naruto sat in his towel in the February cold and waited, which he was good at when he had reason to be, and after 20 minutes Gabrielle had been declared healthy and Fleur had walked through Madame Pomfrey's objections and come to sit beside him on the bank. They sat and looked at the lake for a moment. The crowd was mostly gone now, the stands emptying back toward the castle in the late morning light. You can breathe underwater, Fleur said. Modified technique, chakra-based, it has limits. You moved through the grindalos without a wand. Yes. How? Speed and redirection, they're not actually that dangerous if you can move faster than their response threshold. She processed this. You did all of this without magic. Different system, he said. Same principle, energy, intent, control. She looked at him sideways. You were not even slightly concerned about the temperature. I was concerned about the temperature, he said. I just managed it. You managed a temperature cold enough to incapacitate a fully trained witch. I've been colder, he said, which was true. The chakra environments he'd trained in, some of Kurama's more extreme internal states, the battle winter of the Fourth Shinobi World War's Northern Front. Also, you did beautifully. The Mermish. Where did you learn that? She accepted the subject change with grace, which was Fleur's way of acknowledging that she'd gotten as much information as was available right now and would return to it later. I researched it. After our first conversation about the lake, Mermish is not a publicly available language. It is deeply phonologically specific and most humans cannot approximate it, but there is a text in the Bobaton's restricted collection that provides a workable framework. The merpeople responded well to it. Partially. She looked at the lake, and partially I think to you, you had a quality, she looked for the word, when you were in the water, the merpeople could tell what you were. Something about you registered as significant. Old, he said, probably. Entities that measure things in deep time respond to accumulated experience. The merpeople have been in that lake since before Hogwarts existed. They know what they're sensing. Gabrielle reappeared, wrapped in blankets, and immediately came to sit on Fleur's other side and look at Naruto with the proprietorial attention of a younger sibling conducting ongoing assessment. She had recovered from the enchanted sleep with the resilience of children who bounce between states with an efficiency adults mostly lose. You are Fleur's friend? She asked Naruto in the careful English of someone applying themselves. Yes, Naruto said. Gabrielle looked at Fleur. Fleur looked at the lake. Gabrielle looked back at Naruto with the expression of someone who has noted a discrepancy between the word friend and the available evidence. I think, Gabrielle said, more than friend. Gabrielle, Fleur said. I think so too, Naruto said. Fleur turned to look at him with the specific expression she got when he said something that she hadn't prepared a response for. It was one of his favorite of her expressions, partly because it was rare and partly because it was entirely genuine. No management, no performance, just Fleur Delacour encountering something she hadn't anticipated and sitting in it. 2E's impossible, she said. You are impossible. Pewterter, he said, perhaps, but not wrong. She looked at him for a long moment. The lake was behind them and the castle was ahead and the morning had moved into the soft gray of noon approaching, and Gabrielle between them was making no effort to conceal her interest in the outcome of this exchange. No, Fleur said finally, with the precision of someone choosing a word for its accuracy rather than its impact. Not wrong. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't an arrival. They had arrived nowhere yet, not formally. They were still in the territory that was between something is here and here is what it is. But it was Fleur acknowledging the map, and that was significant because Fleur did not acknowledge maps she hadn't verified personally. Gabrielle made a sound of satisfaction. You are 8 years old, Fleur told her. I am observant, Gabrielle said serenely. They walked back to the castle together, the three of them, and Naruto let Fleur carry the conversation with her sister and paid quiet attention to the way Fleur was with Gabrielle, different from any other version of Fleur he'd seen, warmer and less guarded, the protective instinct visible and unashamed. This was the version of her that existed when she wasn't managing anything. He filed it alongside the morning on the astronomy tower, alongside the real laugh she'd given him in the water, and understood that he was accumulating a portrait of someone who showed their real self in layers rather than all at once, and that he was being granted layers that other people hadn't seen. He understood the weight of that. He didn't take it lightly. Gabrielle had to leave with Madame Maxim's delegation that afternoon, returning to France on the Bobaton's carriage. The farewell at the steps was quick and fierce, Fleur holding her sister in the manner of someone not going to make this dramatic but feeling it very much, and Gabrielle broke free of it long enough to turn to Naruto and say with enormous gravity, You will take care of her. She doesn't need me to take care of her, Naruto said. Gabrielle shook her head impatiently. You know what I mean. He looked at Fleur, who was wearing an expression that was managing to be both embarrassed and something else simultaneously. He looked back at Gabrielle. Yes, he said, I know what you mean. Gabrielle nodded, satisfied, and climbed into the carriage. The The doors closed, the Abraxan horses lifted. Fleur watched the carriage rise until it was a powder blue shape against the gray sky, and then it was gone and she let out a breath that she'd been holding. She is, Fleur started. Great, Naruto said. Exhausting, Fleur said, but her voice was warm with it. They stood on the steps a moment in the quiet that the carriage had left behind. The afternoon was cold and blue-edged and the castle was at their backs. I need to ask you something, Fleur said. Okay, in the water, when you came. She turned to look at him with the direct attention she brought to things that required precision. You said you didn't want me to have to choose between Gabrielle's safety and my own. You calculated the moment. You were already watching when you came in. Yes, he said, that is, she searched and settled on a very specific thing to do for a person. You're a specific person. Naruto. Her voice was quiet, not soft. Fleur's voice was rarely soft, it was precise, and right now its precision was doing something that landed differently than usual. I need you to understand that I am not. She stopped, reorganized. I do not. Another stop. He waited because this was clearly something she was working toward with care and he was going to give her the space to get there. I have not been, she exhaled. Started differently. People look at me and they want things. Always something, my attention, my approval, to be the one who got past the villa, to say they dated the beautiful girl from Beauxbatons. She met his eyes. You don't want any of those things. No, he agreed. What do you want? He thought about this. He thought about it in the window that morning and on the train before fourth year and in the library and on the astronomy tower and in the lake and every moment between. He had the answer ready not because he'd prepared it but because he'd been honest with himself long enough that it had just become true. To know you, he said, the whole of you, not the parts you show people, the real architecture of who you are. I want that and I want you to want the same from me. And I want to see what happens when two people who have been alone for different reasons decide not to be anymore. The February afternoon held still around them. The castle breathed in and out behind them in the way of very old places that have seen many things and are not surprised by this. Fleur looked at him with the gray eyes that were doing the fully open thing now, the thing that had started at depth in the lake and hadn't closed since. That is the most precise declaration I have ever heard, she said. You said you like honesty, he said. I do, she said. I do like it. A pause. I want to know you too, she said quietly and directly, the way she did things she decided on. The impossible old young person who breathes underwater and moves like lightning and talks about ethics and dances properly. I want to know all of it. Then we're in agreement, he said. We are frequently in agreement, she said with the ghost of the smile. It is one of the things I find most surprising about you. Why surprising? Because I expected to be alone in my own particular way, she said. I had accepted it. It is strange to find someone whose particular way overlaps. He looked at her for a long moment, this precise extraordinary person standing on the steps of a castle in the English February, and thought of all the things across 2 lifetimes that had led here, every choice, every loss, every moment of standing in front of something terrible and not moving, and thought that if this was where it had all been going then the route had been worth it. Strange good or strange bad? He asked. She considered it with genuine attention. Strange good, she said. Definitively. They went inside together, out of the cold, into the warm noise of the castle, and walked side by side through the corridors in the easy specific way of people who have worked out the exact distance between them that is both not too far and not yet everything, but moving. That evening, in the library, they sat across from each other with their respective work in front of them and the lamp burning low between them. And Fleur was working through something in French and making notes, and he was reading, and they were comfortable in the silence, which was its own kind of statement about where they were. After a while she looked up and found him looking at her, not in the way he occasionally did when he was tracking something tactical, but in the way she'd started recognizing as specifically his and specifically about her. What? She said. Nothing, he said. I'm just glad you came out of the water. She held his gaze for a moment and then returned to her notes. So am I, she said, which was not nothing. In the back of his mind, underneath all of it, the warmth of the library and the particular satisfaction of being exactly where he was, the low steady pulse of his chakra sense was still running, still reading the castle, still tracking the specific wrongness of the fake moody signature and the dark preparations building around the maze and the end of the year. He was happy. He was alert. He was in the middle of something worth being in the middle of, and something coming that he was going to need to be ready for. Both true, both his. He went back to reading, and across the table from him Fleur turned a page and the lamp burned, and outside the castle the February night was cold and clear and full of stars. Chapter 5. The Dark Lord's mistake. The maze went up on the Quidditch pitch in May, and Naruto spent 3 evenings walking its perimeter. Not inside it. The hedges were 20 feet high, and the tournament rules technically prohibited anyone other than the champions from entering before the task, but around it, close enough to the outer edge that he could run his chakra sense through the root structure. The maze's hedges were alive in the specific way of things that had been enchanted to be more than decorative, and moving his awareness through the biological network of the root system gave him a rough topology of the interior, not detailed. The enchantments on the hedges themselves disrupted finer sensing, like trying to read a map through fog, but enough to confirm the general layout, the dead ends, the paths that connected, and embedded in the maze's center, the Triwizard Cup. He felt its magical signature from 20 meters out and stood very still with his awareness pressed against it, reading it the way you read a face for hidden intention. The cup's own magic, the tournament enchantment, legitimate, old, the selection and binding charm that had operated for centuries was there and intact. Underneath it, threaded through it with the specific surgical quality of someone who understood magical embedding at an advanced level, was something else. A portkey. He crouched at the maze's outer edge in the evening light and sat with this for a while. The modification was good, very good. Whoever had done it understood the cup's original enchantment well enough to layer the portkey charm without disrupting the host magic, like hiding a message inside a letter without changing the letter's meaning. It would be invisible to standard detection charms. It would be invisible to Dumbledore unless he was looking specifically for it, which he might be now given what Naruto had told him in February. He went to Dumbledore that night. "It's in the cup," he said. "Portkey modification. Whoever did it knows what they're doing. It's embedded in the existing enchantment, not sitting on top of it. You'll need to look with the specific frequency of portkey detection layered against the tournament charm's base signature." Dumbledore was at his desk, and he looked at Naruto with the expression he'd been developing over 4 years of these conversations. A combination of genuine respect and something that was adjacent to exhaustion, not with Naruto but with the situation, with the recurring proof that the darkness he'd been watching for had been moving in the places he'd thought were covered. "If I remove it," Dumbledore said, "they will know we found it." "Yes," Naruto said, "and they'll adapt, use something else. Another portkey, a different method. We lose our visibility on the plan. And if we leave it, then Harry touches it, gets transported, and we follow." Naruto met his eyes. "I'll follow. Before Harry reaches the cup, I'll already be at the destination." Dumbledore was very still. "That's not possible through a portkey without—" "I know it's not possible through a portkey," Naruto said. "I'm not going through the portkey." The silence in the office had the specific texture of Dumbledore running through his understanding of what should be physically possible and encountering a wall. Fawkes made a sound from his perch, low and resonant. "Shadow clone," Naruto said, which meant nothing to Dumbledore but was still closer to the truth than anything else he could offer in the time available. "I'll have a copy of myself at the destination before the task starts. When Harry arrives, I'll already be there." "A copy," Dumbledore said carefully. "Full awareness, full capability, shares my senses." He watched Dumbledore process this. "You don't need to understand the mechanism, you need to know that it works. I have found," Dumbledore said slowly, "over the course of a very long career, that the statement 'you don't need to understand the mechanism' followed by 'trust me' tends to proceed from people who are either very foolish or very competent. I have determined which category you occupy. So you'll trust me," Naruto said. "I have been trusting you for 4 years, Dumbledore said. "I see no reason to stop." He looked at Naruto with the complicated weight of everything he knew and didn't know about this boy. "Be careful. I'll be there before anything dangerous happens," Naruto said. "Harry won't be alone." "That is not what I meant," Dumbledore said quietly. "Harry is not the only one I'm concerned about." Naruto looked at him. The old man's expression was genuine, and it landed with a weight he hadn't quite expected. He nodded once and left, and in the corridor outside the stone gargoyle he stood for a moment with his hand against the wall and let himself feel what had just happened, the specific warmth of being someone's concern, of being seen as worth worrying about. It still surprised him. He thought it probably always would. The week before the third task moved with the particular compressed quality of time before significant events. He spent it in several modes simultaneously: ordinary school life, tracking the fake Moody's movements, watching the tournament's preparations, having breakfast and evenings and morning walks that were more valuable to him than anything the tournament contained. He told Fleur about the portkey. Not all of it, not his specific plan, not the shadow clone technique, because some things were easier demonstrated than explained, and this wasn't the moment for demonstration, but the essential shape. The cup was modified. Harry was going to be transported somewhere he wasn't supposed to go. Something was waiting at the other end that was very old and very dangerous. She listened with the full attention she brought to serious things, sitting across from him in their library corner with her hands flat on the table. Voldemort, she said. She didn't say the name the way most people said it, flinching or whispering or avoiding it altogether. She said it the way Naruto said things, as information stripped of the performance of fear around it. What's left of him, Naruto said. He's been trying to get back to a body for 13 years. This tournament is a mechanism for that. He needs Harry's blood. Because of the original protection, she said, parsing it quickly. The blood connection, his mother's sacrifice. Yes, she processed this with the focused efficiency of someone working a problem they consider solvable. And you're going to be there when it happens. I'm going to be there before it happens, he said. I'm going to be there before Harry even arrives. She looked at him steadily. You have said before that you are diminished in this body, compared to what you were. Yes, and you are proposing to intercept Lord Voldemort. Whatever version of him is currently operational, yes. Naruto. Her voice had a quality in it he hadn't heard before, not fear. Fleur didn't do fear in the conventional way, but something adjacent. Something that came from caring about what happened to a specific person. How dangerous is this? He thought about honesty, which he always chose, and answered it honestly. Uncertain, I know what I'm capable of. I don't have full intelligence on what he's currently capable of. The ritual will restore his body, which means he'll be more dangerous after it completes than before. I'm going to try to intervene before it gets that far. Try, she said. I don't fail things, he said, and it wasn't arrogance, it was the statement of someone with extensive evidence, said with the same factual quality he brought to everything. But I also don't overpromise. She held his gaze for a long moment and then looked down at her hands on the table, and he watched the decision being made, the decision to accept this, to not argue against it, because she understood what he was and what he did, and that arguing against it was arguing against the essential thing. Come back, she said. She said it with the precision that was her whole mode of operation, clear and direct and without decoration, and it landed as one of the most significant things anyone had ever said to him in either of his lives. Yes, he said with the same precision. I will, she nodded. They went back to their work. The night before the third task, he sat in the Gryffindor common room while Harry, Ron, and Hermione went through last preparations, and he ran through his own. The shadow clone would need to be deployed before dawn. The destination was a graveyard. He determined that much from reading the portkey's embedded coordinates, which held geographical resonance the way a compass holds direction if you know how to feel it. Somewhere in England, rural, the specific quiet of a place that had been used for something significant before and was being ready to be used again. He'd send the clone in the early hours. It would settle near the graveyard, camouflaged in the way he'd spent 3 years refining chakra suppression, stillness, the particular discipline of a shinobi at rest, and wait for Harry's arrival. He looked across the common room at Harry, who was going through a list with Hermione in the quiet, efficient way they developed for crisis preparation, and felt the protective instinct that had been Harry's since that first day on the train, the same instinct he'd felt towards Sasuke and Sakura and Konoha itself, that specific helpless love of people you'd chosen that was also a kind of responsibility. Harry was going to be fine. He was going to make sure of it. Hey, Harry said, looking up, apparently feeling the weight of Naruto's attention across the room. You're doing the thing. What thing? The watching thing, the one where you look at something like you're mapping it. I do that, Naruto admitted. Harry studied him with the direct perception he'd always had, the quality that meant he saw more than he was given credit for. You know something about tomorrow. I know several things about tomorrow. Are you going to tell me? Naruto looked at him across the room, this boy who had been dropped into an impossible life the same way Naruto had been dropped into an impossible one, with no choice in the matter, with enormous cost, with the expectation of grace under a pressure that would have broken most adults. He thought about what to say and what to withhold and chose honesty over comfort. The cup is a portkey, he said, quietly enough that only Harry heard. It's going to take you somewhere you're not supposed to go. Something is waiting there. Harry absorbed this with the stillness of someone whose threat response had been calibrated by 4 years of genuinely threatening things. Voldemort, he said. Yes, and you, I'll be there, Naruto said, before you, already waiting. Harry looked at him for a long time. Outside the common room window, the June evening was the last soft blue before dark. You know, Harry said, most people who know something like this would tell Dumbledore and let the adults handle it. I did tell Dumbledore, Naruto said, and I'm also handling it personally because Dumbledore can't be in 2 places at once and someone needs to be there with you. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then with the particular simplicity he brought to things that mattered. "Thank you. Don't touch the cup until both you and Cedric have tried everything else," Naruto said. "If you end up holding it, grab Cedric too if he's there. Don't go alone." Harry nodded. "Okay." "And Harry," Naruto held his eyes. "Whatever happens when you get there, don't lose yourself. Stay Harry, that's more important than anything else." Harry held his gaze and nodded again, slower this time, understanding that this was a different kind of instruction than the tactical ones. "Go sleep," Naruto said, "both of you." He stayed in the common room long after Harry and Hermione went up, until the fire burned low and the portraits on the walls settled into their painted sleep, and he sat in the quiet and ran through his preparation one more time with the thoroughness of someone who understood that thoroughness was its own form of respect for what was coming. At 2 in the morning he crossed his fingers and breathed and produced the shadow clone. It took more effort in this body than it had in his first life. The reserves required to sustain a full independent clone significantly heavier at 14 than at 30. But it worked, the familiar billow of smoke, the clone assembling itself from chakra with the ease of muscle memory, standing in the dark common room looking exactly like him. The clone met his eyes with the self-awareness that was one of the stranger aspects of this particular technique. "You know what you're doing," Naruto said. "I know what I'm doing," the clone confirmed. "Don't engage until Harry arrives, read the situation first. Obviously. And if things go further than expected, then I do what we always do," the clone said. "Whatever needs doing," he nodded. The clone dispelled with a soft sound and was gone, and in his chest Naruto felt the divided awareness snap into place, himself here in Gryffindor Tower and simultaneously the perspective of somewhere dark and cold and rural, a graveyard settling into midnight with the particular weight of old stone and older intention. He could feel through the clone's senses, damp grass, the smell of earth, the distant sound of a village somewhere, and underneath all of it the specific resonance of a place that had been prepared for something. A cauldron. A wormtail-shaped presence moving in the dark, muttering to something small and malformed that was curled against a headstone. He felt it through the clone and knew it for what it was, what was left of Voldemort, the fragment, the thing that had been subsisting on possession and borrowed bodies, and the particular tenacity of someone who had worked very hard to avoid dying. It was disgusting in the way of things that have violated their own fundamental nature, not terrifying to him, not in the way it was terrifying to people who had never stood in the presence of something that had touched the root of death and grabbed hold. He'd met things like this before. He knew how they ended. The task began at sunset. He sat in the stands with Hermione and Ron and Fleur. She had insisted on sitting with the Hogwarts students for this, which made certain of the Beauxbatons' contingent raise eyebrows she ignored with practiced ease, and watched the champions enter the maze. He tracked Harry's progress through his clone's peripheral awareness while simultaneously being present in the stands, the divided attention something he'd trained for years to manage cleanly. Cedric first, then Harry. The hedges closed behind them. Fleur sat beside him with her arms folded and her eyes on the maze's entrance. She was doing the contained composure thing, which he'd learned to read as its own kind of expression, the specific pattern of how she held herself when she was feeling something she wasn't ready to let move on her face. Her hand, which had been resting on the bench between them, moved about an inch. He placed his hand next to it. She looked at him sideways. He didn't say anything, just held the eye contact for a moment and then looked back at the maze. After a few seconds her hand moved the remaining inch and her fingers found his and she held on. Not tightly, just the specific pressure of contact chosen and maintained, and he held back the same way. Ron, on his other side, had the heroic propriety not to comment. The maze was silent the way constructed danger was silent, not the absence of sound but the quality of something that had swallowed the sounds that were happening inside it. Occasional flashes of spell light above the hedge line. The crowd's murmur in waves as something significant apparently occurred, and nobody in the stands could see what. Bagman commentating with the specific verbal energy of a man filling dead air. Through his clone's awareness, Naruto tracked the other thing, the graveyard's preparation, Wormtail's movements, the wretched thing in its bundle being positioned near the cauldron. The ritual's components were assembling, bone of the father, flesh of the servant, blood of the enemy. They were waiting for Harry. He felt through the clone's senses the moment the portkey activated, the specific snap of magic at a distance, and then Harry and Cedric arriving in a blaze of displaced air into the graveyard's dark. He felt it happen the way he'd felt his clone's experiences across 2 lifetimes, full sensory contact, the information coming through clean and immediate. He was already moving. The clone unfolded from the shadow of a yew tree where it had been still for 4 hours, completely invisible, and it moved. He moved, both him and not him simultaneously, the information running in both directions, and what the clone did in the graveyard Naruto was aware of in the stands with the specific doubled awareness of shadow clone technique, sitting in the stands feeling his own body's stillness and the clone's absolute motion at the same time. Wormtail's spell hit Cedric before the clone reached him. He felt it happen through the clone's awareness, the green light, the end of it, fast and without preamble, and the grief was instant and real, registering across both layers of his consciousness. Cedric, who had been thoughtful and genuine and hadn't deserved to be here in the first place. He couldn't have stopped it. He calculated this in the fraction of a second that followed, and it was true. The clone had been 10 meters away and moving, and Wormtail had cast before the clone had a clear line of intervention. The geography had not allowed it. He held this truth and continued moving, because grieving while things were still happening was a luxury he'd learned to defer. Wormtail turned to Harry with the rope, and the clone arrived. He came in fast and low, and he put himself between Wormtail and Harry with the specific economy of someone who doesn't waste motion. And Wormtail saw him, and his face did something that moved through shock and confusion, and landed on something that was close to terror. Because whatever Peter Pettigrew had been expecting in this graveyard, it was not a 14-year-old appearing from nowhere who was not moving like a 14-year-old. Who? Wormtail started. Not important right now, Naruto said, and took his wand from him. Not violently, just a smooth redirection of Wormtail's wrist that leveraged the joint and produced the wand in Naruto's hand without either of them needing to move very much. He looked at it, looked at Wormtail, and nodded toward the tree. Sit down. You can't, Wormtail said. I just did, Naruto said. Sit down, Wormtail sat. He had the expression of a man encountering something his planning hadn't accounted for and trying to determine whether his master's instructions covered this contingency. Harry was staring at Naruto. Yes, Naruto said. We'll talk about how later. He looked around the graveyard, assessing. The bundle at the cauldron was still, but not dormant. He could feel it, the malevolent attention of something that had woken up fully at the arrival of Harry's presence. The blood it needed was in this graveyard now, and it knew it. He went to the cauldron and looked at it with the analytical focus he brought to understanding systems. The ritual's mechanism was old and dark and specifically designed: bone of the father, flesh of the servant, blood of the enemy, and the specific alchemical reaction that would use those components to rebuild a corporeal form around the fragment. It was, in a purely technical sense, impressive. Evil and completely contemptible, but impressive. Could destroy the cauldron. He was evaluating this option when Harry made a sound. The bundle had moved. The thing Voldemort, what was left of him, pressed into a body that was wrong in every dimension, had moved toward Harry with the specific speed of something operating on pure will rather than physics, and Harry was frozen in the way of someone whose nervous system has presented them with something outside their categories. Harry, Naruto said, sharp and immediate. Harry snapped back. I see it. Get behind me. I'm not. Get behind me while I figure out the cauldron, Naruto said. I'm not asking you to hide, I'm asking you to give me 30 seconds without needing to protect two things at once. Harry moved behind him. Naruto turned back to the cauldron. He could destroy it. He could flood it with chakra at a density that would disrupt the alchemical process entirely, collapse the ritual preparation, render it inert. That would stop the resurrection tonight. It would not stop Voldemort permanently. The fragment would still exist, still seek another method, still come back eventually through some other route. Or he could let the ritual complete. He ran the calculation in the 2 seconds available to him. Voldemort with a body was more dangerous in the immediate term. Voldemort without a body was more dangerous in the long term, invisible, unpredictable, no fixed location, no physical vulnerability. A Voldemort in a body was a problem that could be addressed directly. A Voldemort without one was a shadow that would haunt the wizarding world for years. Dumbledore had spent 13 years managing the shadow. Naruto had less patience for shadows. He stepped back from the cauldron. Wormtail, seeing his chance, scrambled toward it. Naruto let him. He watched the ritual proceed with the focused attention of someone who has made a decision and is committed to it, and stood between Harry and what was happening with the patient readiness of someone who knows what comes next and is already positioned for it. The cauldron's contents turned bone white, then vivid blue, and then the thing rose out of it. Tall, pale, the flat snake-like face that Naruto had read about in history and that now existed in front of him in the June graveyard night, and Lord Voldemort straightened to his full height and breathed and was alive. The sense of him was extraordinary. Not in the way Dumbledore was extraordinary, not the dense layered warmth of accumulated wisdom. Cold, precise. A magical signature that had been enormous once and had been compressed by years of incorporeal existence into something sharper and more concentrated, like a wide river forced through a narrow channel. Powerful in a way that was also damaged, fractured at the base by whatever the original protection had done to it. Naruto read all of this in the first 5 seconds and adjusted his assessment accordingly. Voldemort's eyes found Harry first. Then, with the specific quality of a tactician registering an unexpected variable, they found Naruto. Curious, Voldemort said. His voice was the voice of someone who had rebuilt everything from scratch and made it precise. I was not expecting a guest. I tend to show up uninvited, Naruto said. A child, Voldemort said, and there was something in his voice that was close to amusement, the contemptuous kind. A child standing in front of Harry Potter, how charming. You get that a lot wrong, Naruto said. The age thing, it's understandable. He tilted his head. You're Tom Riddle. The name hit the graveyard like a stone hits water, the ripple of it moving outward. Voldemort went very still and the stillness had an edge to it. No one, Voldemort said quietly, calls me that. It's your name, Naruto said. I don't see why I'd call you something you chose to replace it with. People who rename themselves to avoid who they are don't usually appreciate the old name, but that's actually the point. The cold eyes studied him with the recalibrating attention of someone encountering a variable that doesn't match their model. You're not afraid, Voldemort said. Less contempt now, more calculation. No, Naruto agreed. You should be. Probably, Naruto allowed. But I've met things that could unmake the world, and they've told me I should be afraid too. I appreciate the tradition. He kept his voice conversational, not provocative. He wasn't trying to antagonize. He was mapping the man's responses, calibrating the distance between what Voldemort was and what Voldemort thought he was. Here's what I know about you, Tom. You split your soul multiple times. You put the pieces in objects and hid them because you were afraid not of other people. You're not afraid of people, but of the end. Of just not existing anymore. You did terrible things to terrible ends because you didn't want to die. I have conquered death, Voldemort said. No, Naruto said simply and completely. You haven't, you've avoided it. There's a difference. Conquering death means you stopped being afraid of it. You're still the most afraid person I've met in 2 lifetimes. The graveyard was very quiet. Harry behind him was still, following the exchange with the attention of someone who understood that what was happening here was not standard. Voldemort looked at him for a long moment and Naruto could feel the read being done, the same kind of read he did on people, the rapid tactical assessment. What is this? Where did it come from? What does it represent? How dangerous is it? You are not simply a child, Voldemort said. I tried to tell you. What are you? Someone who has been where you're going, Naruto said, and meant it in every sense that was available, the grief, the isolation, the construction of walls against loss, the fundamental mistake of deciding that connection was weakness. I've met people who chose power over everything else. They all end the same way, not dead necessarily, just alone in the specific way you don't come back from. Sentiment, Voldemort said, and there was genuine contempt in it now, the reflex of someone who has armored the most vulnerable part of themselves for so long they've forgotten its armor. Philosophy, Naruto corrected, which is different. Voldemort raised his wand. What followed was not a duel in any conventional sense that either the wizarding world or the shinobi world would have recognized. Voldemort cast with the absolute precision of someone who had spent decades refining dark magic into its purest and most efficient forms, and what came from his wand was not showy, it was clean and specific and genuinely dangerous. Killing curses, cruciatus, jinxes layered with dark purpose, and between them structural spells that suggested a tactical mind of real sophistication. Naruto moved. He didn't have a wand out. He didn't need one, wand work was not his primary mode and he was not going to use a tool he was 14 years practiced at against someone who had spent 70 years mastering it. He moved the way he'd always moved under fire, through the geometry of the attack, redirecting rather than blocking, using the angles of Voldemort's casting lines to be somewhere the spell wasn't. He was fast. Not infinitely fast, he'd been faster in his previous life with Kurama's chakra layered through every cell, but fast enough that the first 4 curses found nothing but air where he'd been. Voldemort's expression shifted from contempt to something sharper. Interesting, he said, and his voice was colder now, the entertained quality gone. Naruto came in close, not recklessly, but inside the optimum range for wand work, where the need to adjust casting angle gave him the fraction of a second of reaction time he needed and struck. Not a killing blow. He wasn't trying to kill Voldemort. He knew enough about the Horcruxes to know that killing the body without destroying the soul anchors accomplished nothing permanent, and he hadn't come here to accomplish nothing permanent. He struck to demonstrate. His palm connected with Voldemort's sternum with enough chakra-reinforced force to send him back 8 feet. Not through shield charms, he'd timed it to the gap between spells, the quarter-second where Voldemort's wand was repositioning. The impact landed clean and full, and Voldemort hit a headstone and the headstone cracked. The graveyard was silent. Voldemort stood. He was breathing differently now. Naruto could see the physical calculation, the body reassessing its damage, the ribs that were almost certainly broken on the right side, the impact that had registered as something well outside the expected parameters. "What," Voldemort said very quietly, "did you just do?" "I hit you," Naruto said, "without magic, with my hand." "That's not," Voldemort stopped. His expression was doing something Naruto found genuinely interesting. It was cycling through responses and discarding them, because the available responses were all built on a model of the world that this interaction had just demonstrated was incomplete. He was, underneath the cold and the dark and the constructed monstrosity of what he'd made himself into, a man of exceptional intelligence. And exceptional intelligence confronted with a fact that destroys a model will eventually accept the fact. "You're not from here," Voldemort said, "not from this world's magical tradition." "No," Naruto said, "what you're using isn't magic. Different system, compatible, interestingly. But different." Voldemort looked at him with the specific attention of someone encountering a problem they want to understand before they decide what to do with it. And Naruto recognized this look. He'd seen it on Madara's face, on Kaguya's face, on the faces of every genuinely powerful being who had encountered him and done the update. He was not what they expected, and the not being what they expected was its own kind of information. "You cannot kill me," Voldemort said. "You know this. I have taken precautions that make my death." "I know about the Horcruxes," Naruto said. Absolute silence. The word hung in the June air of the graveyard, and Voldemort went still in a way he had not been still before, not the stillness of assessment, but the stillness of someone who has just heard something that should not be possible. "You cannot know that word," Voldemort said. "And yet," Naruto said, "who told you?" "Nobody told me. I read it in your magical signature the same way I read everything else about you. The fracture in your soul, it's visible if you know what you're looking for." He kept his voice even and factual. "7 pieces, you've hidden them in objects, you carry one in yourself, the others are scattered." He tilted his head. "That's why I'm not going to kill you tonight. Even if I wanted to, which I don't, it wouldn't take. Not until all of them are gone." Voldemort looked at him with an expression that was doing something he probably didn't know was visible. Underneath the calculation and the cold authority and the constructed terror, something very small and very old and almost human, which was the expression of someone who has spent their entire life being the one who knows what nobody else knows, suddenly encountering someone who knows what they know. It was not comfortable for him. Naruto hadn't expected it to be. "What do you want?" Voldemort said, and there was a quality in the question that was different from the earlier contempt, stripped of theater, purely functional. "Tonight, I want Harry to go home alive," Naruto said. "Beyond that, I want you to understand something." "Enlighten me," Voldemort said, and it was close to his court voice, the performed contempt, but not quite. "You built yourself into something that can't be killed," Naruto said. "You spent your entire life on that project. You tore yourself apart to do it. And you did it because you were afraid of being nobody, of going back to the orphan who wasn't special, who had nothing." He said it without cruelty, just with the accuracy of someone who had read the available information and organized it into a picture. "But here's the thing, Tom, you succeeded, you're impossible to kill, and you're also completely alone. Forever, that's not victory, that's the worst version of what you were afraid of." A long silence. Something in the graveyard's air was different than it had been, the specific weight of a moment that is going to be remembered. "You have no idea," Voldemort said quietly, "what I have experienced." "No," Naruto agreed. "And you have no idea what I have, that's not the point." He took a step forward, not aggressive, direct. "I'm not your enemy tonight, Tom, I'm not here to defeat you. I'm here to make sure Harry goes home and to tell you one time honestly with no political agenda behind it that the path you're on ends in a kind of death that's worse than the one you're running from." Voldemort looked at him across the graveyard with the flat, cold eyes that were also, in this specific moment, more human than they had been since the beginning of the encounter. Something in them moved, briefly, the way something moves in still water when a stone has passed under the surface without breaking it. Then it was gone, and he was himself again, the constructed self, the Lord Voldemort who wore Tom Riddle's history like a wound he'd decided to weaponize. You are extraordinary, Voldemort said. Genuinely, I have not encountered anything quite like you. He raised his wand again. But you are also in my way. I know, Naruto said and braced. What followed was different. Voldemort had updated his model and was casting differently, accounting for Naruto's speed, using structural spells that tried to limit his movement space, and the intelligence behind the wandwork was more visible now that the contempt wasn't in the way. He was very good. He was one of the most capable magical combatants Naruto had encountered in this world, with decades of refinement behind him, and he was fighting seriously now. Naruto fought him seriously back. He used Chakra-enhanced speed to stay inside Voldemort's optimal range. He used the physical reinforcement techniques he'd been refining since he was 5 to make direct engagement viable. And he used the accumulated tactical intelligence of his previous lifetime to read 3 steps ahead of the casting patterns. He was hit twice, a modified cutting hex across his forearm that burned, and a binding jinx that caught his left leg for 2 seconds before he burned through it with a chakra pulse. He didn't slow down. Pain was information and he processed it and continued. The crack he'd put in Voldemort's ribs was slowing his casting rate. He targeted the same side consistently, not out of cruelty but because it was the vector that was working. He drove Voldemort back across the graveyard toward the far wall, not defeating him. He couldn't defeat him tonight in any permanent sense and he knew it, but demonstrating, making the demonstration legible, making it real. At the wall, Voldemort did something Naruto respected. He stopped fighting and reassessed. The cold eyes calculated, ran the numbers, arrived at the same conclusion Naruto had arrived at 5 minutes earlier. This was not a battle that was going to be finished tonight in a way that meant anything. We will meet again, Voldemort said. Yes, Naruto said, we will. He paused. But if you come back for Harry, come back to this world and use it as your theater for your war, you'll need to come back for me first. That's not a threat, it's geography. Something moved in Voldemort's face. Not fear. He didn't think Voldemort was capable of fear in the conventional sense anymore. But recognition, the recognition of a variable that had to be accounted for, that was not going away. He turned and vanished. Wormtail, who had been pressed against a headstone for the duration of the exchange with the expression of a man who had made a series of increasingly terrible choices, made a small sound. Go, Naruto said to him flatly. I know what you are, I know where you'll go. When the time comes, that's going to matter. Wormtail fled into the dark. Naruto turned to Harry. Harry was against a headstone, breathing hard, Cedric's body a few feet away. He had the expression of someone who has witnessed something significant and is still in the process of assembling it into sense. He was also, Naruto could see immediately, managing something large and painful, grief for Cedric, the specific shock of a death that had been fast and meaningless and right in front of him. Naruto crossed to him and crouched to his level. Harry's eyes were bright and dry in the way that meant the grief was real and he was holding it with both hands for now. You're okay? Naruto asked. Cedric, Harry started. I know, I'm sorry. He said it without filler, without the softening disclaimers people used around grief to make themselves more comfortable. I'm sorry, I couldn't get there in time. Harry looked at him with the eyes that were Lily Potter's and also entirely his own. You fought him, actually fought him. Yes, and he left voluntarily. We weren't going to finish anything meaningful tonight. He met Harry's eyes, but he knows now what's here, what's standing between him and you. Harry absorbed this. Is that good for tonight? Yes. Naruto stood and extended his hand. We need to go. Can you take the cup? We need to get back. Harry looked at Cedric. We take him with us, Naruto said. We don't leave him here. He said it with the certainty of someone who has never left anyone behind and was not going to start. Harry took his hand and took the cup and they held Cedric between them and the portkey activated. And the graveyard collapsed into nothing and they landed on the Hogwarts grounds in a cascade of noise and light and crowd, and the specific overwhelming reality of being back. The clone dispersed in the same moment they landed, the information collapsing back into Naruto, everything he'd done through the clone's senses folding into his own memory, with the completeness of something actually experienced. He staggered slightly, the integration always having a physical weight to it when the experience had been significant and then steadied. The crowd was there. Dumbledore was there, moving faster than an old man should move, and Madame Pomfrey was there, and then everything was happening at once. Harry being taken, Cedric's body, the confusion of the crowd, and Naruto was standing on the Hogwarts grounds in the June evening with the fresh cut on his forearm and the dispersed clone weight in his chest, and the specific knowledge of what had just happened sitting in him like a stone settling. He had fought Tom Riddle. He had demonstrated something. He had made Harry come home. He had not solved anything permanent, he knew this. There was a long road ahead, Horcruxes to find and destroy, a war to prevent or survive, a darkness that was going to take much more than one graveyard encounter to address. But tonight Harry was home. He felt Fleur before he saw her, the specific quality of her presence in the crowd, the way she moved toward him through the confusion with the direct line of someone who had decided on a destination. She came through the crowd and found him and stopped when she saw the cut on his arm, and her face did something specific, not panic, not the helpless fear of someone who didn't know what to do with injury. The controlled, rapid assessment of someone who cared deeply about the thing being assessed. "You're hurt," she said. "Yes, how badly?" "Not seriously." She looked at the cut with the clinical attention of someone who had done her own research on injury management. Then she looked at his face with the gray eyes that were doing the fully open thing, the thing that meant she was not managing anything right now. "You came back," she said. "I told you I would." "You did." She looked at him for a moment, this full, complete look that was just her, seeing him, the whole of him, the same way he'd always seen her. Then she reached out and took his uninjured arm, her fingers closing around his forearm just above the cut, and held on. He looked at her hand, he looked at her face. "Fleur," he said. "Not yet," she said. "Later, when this is," she gestured at the controlled chaos of the Hogwarts grounds, the officials, the crowd, Dumbledore's urgent movement toward the castle. Later, he agreed. They stood on the Hogwarts grounds in the June evening with the warmth of the crowd around them, and the specific weight of everything that had just happened and everything that was still coming. And she held his arm, and he was present in it completely. The same way he'd been present in everything that mattered, not managing it, not standing to the side of it, but in it with both feet, choosing it. The Dark Lord had been told what stood between him and what he wanted. What stood between him and what he wanted was Naruto Uzumaki, who had lived a full life and died and been reborn into a world that needed exactly what he was. He looked at the stars coming out above Hogwarts and felt the cut on his arm and felt Fleur's hand and felt the grief for Cedric that was going to take time and felt the strange specific gratitude of being exactly where he was supposed to be. He was not done. He was nowhere near done. But he was here and he was whole, and the next chapter of this was going to require everything he had. He was looking forward to it. Chapter 6, What Comes After. The night after the third task had a quality that Naruto recognized from his previous life, the specific density of hours that follow something significant, when the world hasn't yet adjusted to what has changed and everything sits in an uneasy suspension between the before and the after. Madame Pomfrey treated his arm in the corridor outside the hospital wing while simultaneously trying to get him to go inside and lie down, which he declined with the patient repetition of someone who has declined this category of instruction many times across many lifetimes. The cut was clean and not deep and would be unremarkable by morning. He let her apply the dittany and wrap it, and then he sat in the corridor on a stone bench and listened to the castle breathe around him. Harry was inside the hospital wing with Dumbledore, with McGonagall, with the controlled urgency of adults responding to a crisis. Through the door Naruto could hear the tone of it, if not the words, Harry's voice, exhausted and young and carrying something that was going to take a long time to put down. He would go in when Harry needed him. For now, Harry needed Dumbledore, and Naruto was functional enough to know the difference. The fake moody situation resolved itself that night in the way he'd expected, Dumbledore extracting the truth from a man who was actually Bartemius Crouch Jr., which Naruto had confirmed as the identity 3 weeks earlier through accumulated observation and had included in his last briefing. He heard the outcome from McGonagall in the corridor, delivered with the compressed efficiency of someone reporting in a crisis: Crouch, the Death Eater, Polyjuice, the year-long infiltration, the portkey modification. All of it. McGonagall looked at him when she finished, with the specific expression she'd developed for him over 4 years, not the teacher-to-student look, something more horizontal, the look of someone who has long since revised their initial categorization of a situation. "Dumbledore tells me," she said carefully, "that you were aware of the infiltration." "Since September," Naruto said. "We discussed it." "You discussed it with the headmaster and chose not to bring it to me," she said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite accusation but was doing some of the same work. "I brought it to the person with the authority and resources to act on it," Naruto said. "I didn't doubt you, I calculated the most effective chain." A pause. "You are 14 years old," she said in the tone she used when this fact continued to surprise her. "You keep saying that," he said. "It keeps being technically true." Something moved in her expression that might have been a smile in different circumstances. "Get some rest, Mr. Ashford," she said. "Tomorrow is going to be complicated." Tomorrow was an understatement. He slept 4 hours in the Gryffindor dormitory, woke before the others, and went to the window. The June morning was soft and gray, and the grounds were still in the way of places where something has recently happened. He could see Hagrid's hut from here, smoke going up from the chimney, and beyond it the forest's dark edge, and beyond that the sky beginning its slow work toward blue. He thought about Cedric. He'd been doing this in the background since the graveyard, the specific grief of a death that was wrong not just in its violence but in its meaning. Cedric Diggory had been a genuinely decent person who had done everything right and been killed for being in the wrong place, which was the kind of death that resisted narrative. It didn't mean anything. It was just the waste of someone who should have had much more time. He sat with this grief cleanly, the way he'd learned to sit with grief over a lifetime of losses, not pushing it down, not dramatizing it, just acknowledging what it was and what it meant and then continuing, because continuing was the only real answer to loss. You continued and you carried it, and eventually the weight became familiar enough that you could work with it. He went to breakfast early. The great hall was quiet, the kind of quiet that had texture to it. Students coming in ones and twos rather than the usual crowd, voices lower, the specific hush of a community that has had something taken from it and hasn't decided yet how to carry the new shape of things. Fleur was there. She claimed their corner of the Gryffindor table. She had simply started sitting there 2 months ago and nobody had objected, partly because she was Fleur and partly because anyone considering objecting had assessed Naruto's likely response and decided against it. She was reading, a cup of tea at her elbow, and she looked up when he sat down. She looked at his arm first. The bandage was still there under his sleeve, just visible at the cuff. "Better?" she asked. "Good as gone," he said. Which was almost true. The Dittany had been working through the night, and by afternoon there'd be nothing but a thin silver line. She poured him tea without being asked, which was a thing she'd started doing at some point without either of them marking the moment it became a habit. He accepted it with the same non-ceremony, and they sat in the quiet hall and drank their tea while the sky through the high windows went from gray to pale gold. "Tell me what happened," she said. "All of it. You were in 2 places at once." He looked at her. She met his gaze with the steady directness of someone who has decided they are owed the full picture and is prepared to wait for it. "Shadow clone," he said. "Technique from my previous life. I can create a full physical copy of myself, same memories, same capabilities, shared senses. The copy went to the graveyard hours before the task. I was in the stands with you while simultaneously being in the graveyard." She processed this with the focused attention she brought to significant information. "The copy, it's genuinely you, not a projection, not a vision, fully physical, fully conscious. Everything it experiences comes back to me when it disperses. And the dispelling, that's what happened when you came back through the portkey. I saw you stagger. Integration, wait. The graveyard's experiences folding back in. It's more significant when the experience has been." He searched for the word, intensive. "You were fighting," she said, "through the clone. Sitting next to me." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, holding her cup with both hands, looking at him. "And now you have the memories of fighting Voldemort and of sitting with me simultaneously." "Yes." "What was it like?" she said, both at once. He thought about this honestly. "Strange," he said, "not uncomfortable, more like," he looked for the right image, "like reading 2 books at the same time except one of them is happening to your body. The part with you was louder." She held his gaze. Something in her expression moved. "Louder," she said. "More present," he said. "More real, if that makes sense, when the alternative was a graveyard." She looked down at her tea. Then quietly, "What was he like?" She didn't need to clarify who. "Intelligent," Naruto said without hesitation. "Genuinely extraordinary in certain dimensions, and completely lost in the specific way of someone who made one fundamental choice a long time ago and has been paying for it ever since." He looked at the table. "Lonely underneath everything he's built, which is probably not what most people would say about him." "It is probably not," she agreed. "But it's true." Fear of death became fear of connection because connection means loss, eventually. And he handled that fear the way people handle fears they can't face directly. He built walls and called them strength. He looked up at her. "I've seen that construction before, different scale, same architecture." She was watching him with the full gray-eyed attention. "You spoke to him about this." "I tried." "Did it?" "No," he said, "not in a way that changed anything tonight, maybe not ever. Some things are too far built to deconstruct in one conversation." A pause. "But I said it, honestly, with no agenda. That matters even when it doesn't land." Fleur was quiet for a moment. "You tried to reach him," she said, "the most dangerous person in the wizarding world, and you tried to reach him." "I try to reach everyone," he said with the straightforwardness of someone stating a personal policy. "It doesn't always work. It worked enough times in my previous life to think it's worth the attempt." She looked at him with an expression that was doing several things at once: the assessment, the something deeper, the particular quality she developed over the months of this that meant she was fully present with him, all the management down, just her. "You are the most unusual person I have ever met," she said. "You've said that before. It continues to be true." She set down her cup. "Naruto, I want to tell you something." "Okay," he said. "When you came back through that portkey," she stopped. "Reorganized." Fleur, who chose every word with precision, reorganizing meant the words mattered a great deal. "When I saw you come back, I understood something that I had been not avoiding precisely but not looking at directly." She met his eyes with the directness that was one of his favorite things about her. "I have been careful with people my entire life, careful about who I allow close. Not because I am cold, though people believe that. I know you're not cold," he said. "But because the cost of being wrong about a person is very high when you are what I am. When people see you as a symbol or an inheritance or a beautiful object, and you let them close and then discover what they were actually responding to." She stopped. "It is a particular kind of humiliation. I had decided it was not worth the risk. And then I showed up," he said. "And then you showed up," she agreed, "and looked at me the wrong way, or the right way, the way I had told myself did not exist." She looked at her hands. "And last night I was sitting in those stands and you were in two places, and one of you was fighting something I cannot imagine fighting, and I was holding your arm and I understood." Her voice was even precise, everything she was, "that what I feel for you is not careful, it is not managed. It is." She stopped once more, and in the stop was everything she was working through to say the next thing, significant, in a way I had not planned for and cannot now imagine not having. The great hall was quiet around them. A few other students at the far end, too distant to hear. The morning light doing its slow work through the windows. He looked at her, this extraordinary, precise, genuinely singular person who had just handed him something she'd been protecting with both hands, and he felt the specific weight of being trusted with something real. "Fleur," he said, "I came into this world with all my memories, everything I ever felt, everyone I ever loved. I told myself when I was small, when I was working out what this new life was, that I was going to be careful, that I'd been through enough. That I'd invest in the things that needed me, but I'd keep certain distances. And," she said, "and then I met you in the library and you were doing reconnaissance on a room like a tactician, and your magical theory was philosophically interesting and you were the loneliest person in the building and you didn't want anyone to know it." He looked at her steadily. "I didn't plan for you either, but I was glad about it from the first week, and every week since, increasingly, in a way that is," he borrowed her words, "significant, specifically and completely." She looked at him for a long time. The morning light was gold now, proper summer morning gold coming through the enchanted ceiling, and it caught her hair and the sharp bones of her face and the gray eyes that were completely, openly his. "Yes," she said, which contained everything. "Yes," he agreed. It was not a dramatic moment. They were sitting at a breakfast table in the school that Voldemort had just confirmed his return through, the day after a boy had died in a graveyard, the morning after everything had changed. It was not the right moment for drama, but it was real. It was completely and specifically real, and both of them knew it, and that was enough. Hermione arrived at the table 20 minutes later, and looked at the two of them with the rapid, comprehensive assessment of someone who processes social situations at the same speed she processed texts. Something in the arrangement of them, the specific ease of the space between them, the fact that Fleur was still at the Gryffindor table at all, the quality of the quiet, registered in Hermione's expression as arriving at a conclusion she'd been approaching for months. "Good morning," she said, sitting down with her characteristic efficiency, and if there was an extra warmth in the way she directed it at both of them, she had the grace not to make it obvious. Ron arrived 30 seconds later, surveyed the situation with less subtlety, and said, "Oh, finally," with the heartfelt relief of someone who has been watching a long approach and is glad to see the landing. "Ronald," Hermione said. "What? It's been months." He sat down and reached for the toast. "Honestly, the two of you have been doing the thing with the eyes for so long I was starting to think it was just how you stood near each other." Fleur looked at Ron with an expression that was startlingly close to the one she used on Gabrielle, not unkind, but the patience of someone managing a situation that was endearing despite itself. "Thank you, Ron," she said in the tone that closed topics. Ron looked at Naruto. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Ron went back to his toast with the cheerful acceptance of someone who has said his piece. Harry came in at 8 from the direction of the hospital wing, and he looked not good, not broken, but the specific gravity of someone who was carrying a new weight and had not yet worked out the distribution. He sat beside Naruto without speaking and accepted the food that materialized in front of him with the automatic quality of a body doing what it knows to do. After a few minutes, "Dumbledore's calling a staff meeting," Harry said. "About everything, he stopped. about Cedric. And about another stop. Voldemort saying it out loud. Good, Naruto said, people are going to lose it. Probably that's what happens when things that were hidden stop being hidden. First there's the losing it, then there's the adjusting. Harry looked at him. You fought him last night, the real him, not the fragment in Quirrell. You actually, yes. And Harry's voice had the quality of someone whose model of what was possible was still updating. He retreated. He made a tactical decision that the engagement wasn't producing useful outcomes, Naruto said. That's different from being defeated. But he retreated, Harry said. He stopped. The people who fought him the first time, the Order of the Phoenix, he never retreated from them. I'm a different variable, Naruto said simply. Harry was quiet, looking at his food. Then he's going to come back for me. Yes, and for you now. Probably, Naruto said. That's fine. I'd rather he comes for me directly than goes sideways at people who aren't prepared for it. Harry looked at him with those green eyes that were doing the Harry-specific thing, the reading, the direct perception, the seeing under the surface of things. Naruto, are you scared? Any of it? He thought about Honest. He always thought about Honest first. Not of him, he said. Of losing people, yes. Of making a mistake that costs someone else that stays with me, but of Voldemort himself. I know what he is. I've met things that were larger and more dangerous and I'm still here. In this life, Harry said. In any of them, Naruto said. Harry absorbed this. I want to be like that, he said, quietly. Not self-pitying, just honest, the way Harry was honest when he wasn't performing brave. Not afraid of it. You're not afraid of the thing, Naruto said. You're afraid of the losing, that's different. That's not a weakness, it's what you're fighting for. The day you stop being afraid of losing is the day you stop caring about what you're protecting. Harry was quiet for a moment. He started and stopped and then said, My dad, what you just said sounds like something my dad might have said. Naruto looked at him. You've never met your dad. But there are people who knew him. Harry looked at his food. Lupin, serious. A pause. He was, another pause, something careful in it. He was brave in the same way you are, I think, the kind that isn't about not being scared. That's the only kind worth having, Naruto said. They ate in companionable silence, the six of them around the end of the Gryffindor table, him and Fleur and Harry and Hermione and Ron and Neville, who had arrived quietly and hadn't asked any questions, and was eating his eggs with the uncomplicated steadiness of someone who understood that sometimes the kindest thing was presence without interrogation. Neville was better at that than people gave him credit for. The day unfolded as days do after significant events, not cleanly, not with any satisfying structure, but in the accumulated weight of many small interactions that were all shaped by the thing that had happened. Dumbledore's announcement at lunch confirmed what was already spreading through the school by rumor, that Voldemort had returned, that a student had died, that the world was different than it had been yesterday morning. He said it with the directness of a man who had decided that the truth, even the terrible truth, was better than the managed comfortable lie. The Ministry would say otherwise, Naruto knew. He'd already been reading the political dynamics, the fudge-shaped anxiety about information that destabilized the status quo. There was going to be a period of institutional denial that was going to cost people. He had thoughts about that. He was saving them. The afternoon was strange and quiet. Naruto sat in the Gryffindor common room with Harry and Hermione and worked through practical things, what was known, what needed to be done, what the timeline might look like. Not as a meeting, not as a planning session, just as the natural extension of three people who dealt with things by understanding them. The Horcruxes, Hermione said at one point, and the word landed in the room with the weight of something she'd been holding. You know about them, Naruto said. She stopped. I researched. After you mentioned Voldemort's soul fragmentation to Harry at the start of term. I wasn't sure what you meant and I needed to understand it. She looked at him with the expression of someone who has found something in a book that she wished she hadn't found. Their dark magic at the most fundamental level, soul division, it requires. She stopped again. Yes, Naruto said, it does. There are multiple, Harry said. It wasn't a question. 7 total. One was the diary from second year, that's gone. One he carries in himself. 5 others somewhere. Naruto looked at the fire. Finding and destroying them is the actual work. The rest of it, the confrontations, the political situation, all of it is secondary to that. How do you know all this? Hermione asked, with the honest directness of someone who has been sitting on the question for a while. I read his magical signature in the graveyard, Naruto said. The fracture is visible if you know what to look for. I know what to look for. Hermione looked at him with the expression she used when she was deciding whether to push further on something. She decided not to. Dumbledore knows. We'll talk to him, Naruto said, about all of it together. He looked at Harry. The 3 of us, he needs to know what we know and we need to know what he knows. No more him managing pieces of information and us operating on incomplete pictures. Harry nodded slowly. He'll resist. Yes, Naruto said. He manages things, it's his instinct. He looked at the fire. I'm going to have a conversation with him about that specifically. Should that conversation worry me? Hermione asked. It should worry Dumbledore, Ron said from the corner, not looking up from his chocolate frog card. Naruto smiled. It'll be fine, he's reasonable. He went to Dumbledore's office before dinner alone. The gargoyle admitted him without waiting for a password, which meant Dumbledore had left instructions, which meant Dumbledore had been expecting him. The headmaster was standing at his window, looking out at the grounds in the evening light, and he turned when Naruto came in with the expression of a man who had been doing significant thinking. You know about the Horcruxes, Dumbledore said. Yes, so does Hermione. Harry will know fully by tonight. He sat down in the chair across from Dumbledore's desk, not waiting to be invited, and looked at the old man with the directness he brought to conversations that mattered. I'm not going to ask you to tell us everything you know all at once. I understand you have reasons for sequencing information the way you do. But I'm going to tell you that Harry needs to understand the full architecture of what he's facing, not the managed version. He held Dumbledore's eyes. He's stronger than you give him credit for. He can carry real weight. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he crossed to his desk and sat slowly with the specific weight of someone setting something down. I have been, he began and stopped and tried again. My instinct with Harry has always been to, another stop. Protect him from the burden of knowing too much, too young. You and Harry have something in common, Naruto said. You're both afraid of losing. For him, it's the people he loves. For you, it's him. He said it without cruelty, just with the accuracy he'd been applying to everything since the graveyard. That fear has led you to manage information in ways that are ultimately more dangerous than the alternative. Dumbledore looked at him with the expression of someone being told something true that is uncomfortable. He is the person this war is built around, Naruto continued. He has the right to understand why, not eventually, now, a pause. And I'm going to be beside him for this. Not just him and Hermione and Ron. They are better together than they are with information rationed out on someone else's schedule. You are asking me to change the fundamental approach I have taken to this situation, Dumbledore said mildly. Yes, Naruto said, I'm asking you to trust the people who are going to be in the middle of it rather than the plan you've built around them. He leaned forward slightly. I've done both. In my previous life, I was managed by people who thought they knew better for most of my early years. It produced suffering that could have been avoided. Later, when people actually trusted me, told me the full truth of things and let me make real choices that produced something different. What did it produce? Dumbledore asked, and the question was genuine. A war that was survived, Naruto said, by more people than would have otherwise. Silence. The portraits on the walls were still, even the ones that usually dozed had woken up as they did when significant conversations happened in this room, and were listening with the particular painted attention of people who have seen many headmasters and know when history is being made or revised. What would you have me do? Dumbledore asked, and it was the most unguarded question Naruto had heard from him in 4 years. Tell Harry about the prophecy, Naruto said. He knows part of it, tell him the rest. Tell him about the Horcruxes, everything you know. Tell him what you suspect about where they are. He paused. And then trust that what you told him will be held properly because it will be. He is not what you're afraid he is. He's not fragile. Dumbledore looked at him for a very long time. Outside the window, the grounds were gold and long-shadowed in the June evening. Fawkes sang a single low phrase. You know, Dumbledore said finally, when you first came to see me in your first year with your note about Quirrell, I thought I was dealing with a precocious child, unusually perceptive, perhaps with some special gift. He looked at Naruto with the complicated expression that 4 years of these interactions had built. I understand now that I was dealing with something considerably more complete than that, a person who had already been through a long life, who had already made the mistakes and learned the corrections. Some of them, Naruto said, I keep finding new ones. Yes, a slight smile. That doesn't stop. Dumbledore looked down at his desk. I will speak to Harry this week, everything. He looked up. I would like you present for that conversation if you're willing. Yes, Naruto said. Good. He stood to go and Dumbledore said as he reached the door, Naruto, he turned. What happened in that graveyard, Dumbledore said. What you did, not just the fighting. The attempt to reach him. A pause. I tried once many years ago to do something similar to reach Tom Riddle before he became what he became. I failed. His voice was very quiet. I have lived with that failure. Naruto looked at him. You probably did everything right, he said. Sometimes people have already made a choice that can't be unmade at the point when you encounter them. That's not your failure. That's the specific tragedy of people who choose wrongly before anyone can help them choose better. Dumbledore was quiet. You didn't fail, Naruto said. You just couldn't succeed. Those aren't the same thing. He left the headmaster's office and went downstairs through the castle, and the evening light came through the high windows in long bars of amber, and the castle breathed around him with the old warmth of a place that had been home to many lives. He found Fleur on the grounds. She was at the lake's edge, standing in the last of the evening light, and she turned when she heard him coming with the instinct she developed for his particular approach, the quiet, specific sound of him. How was it? She asked. Good, necessary. He came to stand beside her, and they looked at the lake, which was still in the summer evening, the surface catching the gold light and holding it. He's going to tell Harry everything properly. You convinced him. We convinced each other, he said. He's not a man who needs to be overcome, he needs to be given the right argument. She nodded. They stood in silence for a moment, the good kind, and then she said, I have made a decision. He waited. I am not returning to France, she said. At the end of term, I had intended to. My placement year at Beauxbatons is complete. I have options at the ministry in Paris. My family is there. She looked at the lake. But I am staying in Britain. He looked at her. Why? She turned to look at him, and the gray eyes were direct and clear and completely certain. Because this is where the work is going to happen, she said. Voldemort is going to build a war, and it is going to be centered here, and I am not a person who goes somewhere safe to wait for other people to manage difficult things. She held his gaze. And because what I have here is worth staying for. He looked at her for a long moment. Your family, my family will understand, she said. Mammon will be furious for 3 weeks, and then she will come and meet you and decide she understands. The ghost of the smile. Papa will want to test you. He tests everyone. I can handle tests, Naruto said. I know, she said. That is one of the things I like about you. He looked at her in the evening light. This woman who had decided to stay in a country that was walking toward a war because she was not a person who retreated from difficult things, and felt something enormous and warm and specific settle into the center of his chest. Not new. It had been building since a library in October and a dance in December and a cold morning on the astronomy tower and a dark lake in February and a graveyard the night before. But settled now. Landed. I'm glad you're staying, he said, which was the understatement of both his lifetimes. I know, she said, with the precision she brought to everything. You may express that more fully if you like. He laughed, the real one, short and full. I'm very glad you're staying. I would have been significantly less functional if you'd gone back to France. Only significantly less. Dramatically, he said. Fundamentally, the adverb can be as large as you need it to be. She looked at him with the full open expression, the one that meant all management was down. That will do, she said. They stood together at the lake in the last of the summer evening, and the light went slowly from gold to amber to the beginning of the blue that precedes dark, and neither of them moved to go back to the castle yet because there was no particular reason to hurry. What comes next? She asked, after a while. Thought about it honestly. A war that's going to take several years, Voldemort building his network, recruiting, coming back into the open, the ministry denying it until they can't anymore, Horcruxes to find and destroy, and all the ordinary things, school next year, the year after, Newts, whatever comes after. He looked at the lake. It's going to be hard, there will be losses, the darkness is going to get into places we've secured and we'll have to secure them again. Yes, she said, and we'll handle it, he said, all of it, the way you handle difficult things by not pretending they're something other than what they are and moving anyway. She nodded slowly. Together, she said, not a question. A statement in the way she made statements, precise and chosen and absolutely meant. Together, he agreed. In the same way, the lake settled into its evening stillness. Somewhere in the forest, a bird made a sound and stopped. The castle at their backs was warm with light from its windows, and in a few minutes they would go back to it, to Harry and the others, to the long work that was starting. He had come into this world with everything he'd been, every skill, every memory, every piece of the previous life that had made him Naruto Uzumaki. He'd been afraid, for a while in the earliest years, that he would always be more ghost than person, that the weight of the first life would make the second one something he moved through rather than lived. But this was living. This specific June evening, this lake, this person beside him. Harry in the hospital wing this morning, the specific gravity of his green eyes. Hermione at the breakfast table processing Horcrux theory with the focused intensity she brought to things that mattered. Ron saying finally with the heartfelt simplicity that was his particular genius. Neville eating his eggs with uncomplicated steadiness. Dumbledore at his window, putting something down that had been heavy for a long time. The Weasley twins in the first week on platform 9 3/4. Lupin's nine-tailed Patronus reaction. Fox singing, all of it his both knew and fully meant. He was not done. He had never been the kind of person who was done. The story always had another chapter, always needed another person stood up for, another darkness walked toward. That was what he was. It was what he would always be. But in this moment at the lake in the evening with Fleur beside him choosing to stay, he was not fighting anything. He was not preparing for anything. He was not managing, not tracking, not operating. He was just here, completely. In the full and specific sense of someone who has found, after a very long road through 2 lives, the particular coordinates of a place worth being. Fleur moved slightly and her shoulder found his, and they stood like that in the settling dark, 2 people who had come to this from entirely different directions and arrived at the same place. The place that was, in both its difficulty and its richness, theirs. The sky above the lake went from blue to deep blue to the first dark of night, and the stars appeared the way they always appeared, slowly, then all at once, the whole enormous field of them, indifferent and beautiful and very far away. He looked up at them and thought, I'm here, not to anyone in particular, not to the force or accident or cosmic design that had dropped him into this second chance. Not to Kurama, whose absence still ached sometimes in the center of his chest like a healed break that remembered the cold. Not to the people he'd loved in his first life who were somewhere beyond any reach he had now, just to the fact of it. The simple, complete ongoing fact of being here in this life with all of it ahead. He was Naruto Uzumaki. He was 14 years old, he was ancient, he was beginning. He had a war to help win and a darkness to outlast and a world to protect, and beside him a person whose shoulder was warm against his and who had decided with the direct certainty she brought to everything that this was where she was going to be. He was not afraid of any of it. He was, in the most complete sense of the word, ready.